The literature passage of the March 2018 SAT. This passage is adapted from Denao Mengetsu, The Beautiful Things That Heaven Bears. Naomi, an 11-year-old on school break, is visiting the narrator, a family friend from Ethiopia, at the store he manages. They have made a plan to read the novel The Brothers Karamazov together. I read 40 or 50 pages that first day. Naomi read none. After I read the first page, I waited for her to pick up where I had left off, but she insisted, in a voice that bordered on pleading, that I continue. One more, she said at first, and when that page had been completed, she added another one more to that, until eventually there were so many pleases and pretty pleases and come on pleases that I was left utterly defenseless. So we can tell already from the beginning of the passage that the narrator is reading to Naomi, obviously, but Naomi is very invested in reading. She is very intrigued and she's very engaged because she keeps on telling the narrator to read her more. I looked up every couple of pages to see if Naomi was still paying attention, and of course she was. Her attention, in fact, never seemed to waver. I felt her staring at me sometimes when my eyes were focused on the page, and I realized she was taking it all in, not just the words, but me, and the scene that we had created together. I tried not to notice too much, to simply just live, but that was impossible. Every time I looked at her, I became aware of just how seemingly perfect this time was. I thought about how years from now I would remember this with a crushing, heartbreaking nostalgia, because of course I knew even then that I would eventually find myself standing here alone. So here, as the narrator's reading to Naomi, he's sort of thinking about his future. He really cherishes and tries to, enjoy this moment, but at the same time, he realizes that in a certain amount of time, maybe in a few years, in a few months, when Naomi goes back home, he'll only have the memories, and he'll eventually be there in his shop alone. And just as that knowledge would threaten to destroy the scene, Naomi would do something small, like turn the page to earlier shift in her chair, and I would be happy once again. I had more customers then, and I treated each interruption to a reading as an assault on my privacy. When someone I didn't know entered the store, Naomi would mark where I had left off so that I could keep my eyes on the person wandering around the aisles. She would take the book out of my hand, point her finger on the exact word or sentence I had just concluded, and hold it there until I returned. I kept one man who came to the counter with a single roll of toilet paper under his arm, waiting for more than a minute while I finished reading a page I had just started. At first, he smiled and was charmed by what he saw. The charm wore off when I refused to acknowledge him. He responded by slamming the roll on the counter inches from my face and storming out. Naomi and I read on. So here, this paragraph sort of shows just how engaged and just how important reading is to the narrator and Naomi. The narrator sort of realizes that his time with Naomi reading this book is limited, so he tries to take advantage of every moment and of every page and every story that he can tell. I slipped into the characters as I read. I grumbled and bellowed, slammed my fist on the counter, and threw my arms wide open. So he's sort of acting out what's happening in the story. I knew this was exactly what my father would have done had he been the one reading. So he sort of takes this influence from his father, maybe from his childhood when his father told him stories. He would have made the story an event, as grand and real as life. He must have told me hundreds, perhaps even thousands of stories, not just at night, but throughout the course of any given day, over breakfast, during lunch, in the middle of a conversation he might have been carrying with my mother or friends. So here, from these few lines, we can really tell sort of how meaningful reading was to the narrator's father and the narrator's family, because, no matter the time, no matter the place, the father was always telling stories and always, entertaining the people around him. There was no wrong time with him, so there was no wrong time for a story, or if there was, he didn't live long enough for me to see it. The stories he invented himself, he told with particular delight. They all began the same way, with the same light-hearted tone, with a small wave of the hand, as if the world were being brushed to the side. So when he's sort of telling the stories, you lose sort of track of time. You lose your place in the world. You become so, you become so entranced by the story that you forget everything else, which I suppose for him it actually was. That reminds me. Did I tell you about the farmer who was too lazy to plow his fields, the hyena who laughed himself to death, the lion who tried to steal the monkey's dinner, the monkey who tried to steal the lion's dinner? If I had heard the story before, I let him tell it to me again. So even if the narrator has heard the story before, he lets his father tell it to him again. Because, in the following line, his performance was that good. His love of the story was that obvious. When Fyodor Karamazov spoke, I waved my hands wildly in the air. I grumbled in a deep baritone and tried as hard as I could to do my father proud. Ah, you fools, I shouted out, and Naomi smiled in delight. Naomi found each of the characters as real as anyone she met in the street. So, the narrator here is successfully, taking his father's inspiration and, passing it on to Naomi, because we can see that Naomi is enjoying the story that the narrator is telling. Ooh, I hate him, she would cry out after a particularly cruel antic on the part of the elder Karamazov. When it came to Alyosha, though, the youngest and gentlest of the Karamazov brothers, she was willing to fall completely in love. Okay, so that concludes the passage analysis. Now let's move on to the questions. 1. Over the course of the passage, the main shift in focus is from. So without looking at the answer choices, at the beginning, it's the narrator telling a story or recalling an event of an activity where he gets very emotional, an activity that he finds very valuable, an activity that means a lot to him. And towards the end, he sort of reflects upon his childhood and maybe on how his father influenced him and his storytelling ability. So let's look for a choice that says that. An anecdote about an amusing event to a recollection of similar events from the narrator's childhood. So I'm assuming this anecdote that talks about an amusing event is the anecdote about the man buying toilet paper and how he slammed it on the desk and ran out because he wasn't being acknowledged by the narrator. Because this is really the only anecdote that the narrator tells. And we see here later in the answer choice that it talks about a recollection of similar events, but we really don't see similar events happening from the narrator's childhood, so A is wrong. B, an account of the early stages of a friendship to a foreshadowing of that friendship's ultimate demise. So there really is no, at least reading the passage, I get no foreshadowing of how maybe Naomi and the narrator's relationship will come to an end, or maybe something really bad will happen. And moreover, we can't really tell that this is the early stages of a friendship because after all, they are family friends, so B is wrong. C, a description of an emotionally significant activity, okay? Reading is emotionally significant to the narrator because, again, in around line 20, he remembers that eventually these memories that he's cherished for so long will fade, so it is emotionally significant. To a reflection on the narrator's early experiences with that activity. This makes a lot of sense because the narrator's early experiences with that activity are the experiences he had listening to the stories that his father told. So C should be the right choice here. D, a character sketch of an individual to a consideration of how that individual has changed the life of the narrator. There is a consideration sort of how an individual has changed the life of the narrator because the father talks about reading stories to the narrator sort of shaped the narrator's life and changed his life, but it doesn't begin with a character sketch of the father. The father isn't really talked about until the back half of the story, so D is wrong. 1 is C. Number 2, which choice best supports the conclusion that reading to Naomi interferes with some of the narrator's responsibilities? So if we recall back to the passage, I immediately remember sort of that point where the narrator doesn't go and talk to the customer and instead just continues reading to Naomi. So let's look for the lines that say that. So here, the narrator talks about the one man who comes to the counter with a single roll of toilet paper and how he refused to acknowledge him. So that's around lines 35 through 38, and that's what we see here. Option D for number 2. Number 3, the narrator's descriptions of Naomi suggest that she is notable for her. Okay. Empathy toward other people. We don't really see how Naomi is sort of caring and giving and empathetic to other people. Because the only interaction we see with Naomi is reading, and she doesn't really display how she's empathetic towards other people while she's reading. Ability to concentrate and observe. I recall that the narrator talks about Naomi, really paying attention and concentrating on the reading as they read. So B could be a correct answer. Let's try to find the line, though, where the narrator talks about that. Let's see. Here he talks about reading a page, being happy, heartbreaking nostalgia. In line 10, I looked up every couple of pages to see if Naomi was still paying attention, and of course she was. So that sort of shows her ability to concentrate. Her attention, in fact, never seemed to waver. Okay, so that's like solid evidence for choice B. Talent for dramatizing fiction. This is not true because we never really see Naomi's talents, and we never see her storytelling abilities. We only see the narrator's ability to, make the stories dramatic and bring the stories to life. We never see Naomi's talent in that, so C is wrong. Optimism despite many hardships. Two things are wrong. We never see optimism, and of course, we don't even see any hardships that Naomi may be facing. So D is wrong. Number 3 is B. Number 4, which choice best reflects the perspective of the narrator regarding his reading to Naomi? So without looking at the answer choices, I think, looking from the passage, knowing what we read, that he sort of cherishes it, he values it, but at the same time, he's sort of sad because he knows that eventually these good times will end. So let's look for an answer choice that says that. He's unequivocally delighted. So he is 100% delighted because reading to Naomi has provided him with a much needed creative outlet. He isn't unequivocally delighted because he is delighted and, he sort of enjoys reading to Naomi, but in the back of his head, there's still that, negativity and that sadness. So A is wrong. He's pleasantly surprised because he did not expect Naomi to be so enthusiastic about reading. We never know, there's no indication in the text of the author's previous expectations of Naomi. So B is wrong. He's occasionally regretful because he is not as skilled a reader as his father was. We can't compare how skillful he was compared to his father because he never talks about this. He is somewhat ambivalent. Okay, ambivalent meaning he sort of has some positive feelings, but he also has some negative feelings. So that makes sense already because he knows this reading time with Naomi will inevitably end. So that really sounds like what we talked about because he cherishes this moment, he values it, he has fun in the moment, but at the same time he's sad because he knows what's going to come in the future. So for number 4, D is the right answer. So let's move on to number 5. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? So the answer to the previous question was that he is somewhat ambivalent. He still holds his, sadness because he knows that these times will end. And if we look in the passage, lines 20 really show that. I thought about how years from now I would remember this with a crushing, heartbreaking nostalgia because, of course, I knew even then that I would eventually find myself standing here alone. So let's look for, one of those lines in the answer choices for number 5. So for number 5, we see lines 17 through 23, every alone. So every time I looked at her, I became aware of just how seemingly perfect this time was. That shows ambivalent, that shows the positive aspect. But at the same time, he thinks about, crushing, heartbreaking nostalgia, eventually finding himself alone. So B is the correct choice for number 5, lines 17 through 23. As used in line 34, concluded most nearly means. She would take the book out of my hand, put her finger on the exact word or sentence I just concluded. So concluded here means the sentence or the word that the narrator had just finished reading. So B, finished, will be the correct answer for number 6. Number 7, it can reasonably be inferred from the passage that the narrator's father influenced him by. So the narrator's father influenced him by. Without reading the answer choices, I can sort of say that the narrator's author gave him this sort of inspiration for how to tell a story. The narrator's father sort of told these stories in an energetic way and brought them to life. And in the same way, the narrator has taken inspiration from his father and started, to tell stories in the same way to Naomi. A, creating an environment that encouraged young people to express themselves. We never know if he, created an environment to help young people in general. We just know that, he sort of told stories in this imaginative way to his family. So A is wrong because it's just too general. B, emphasizing what was most important in a life well lived. He never emphasizes, that reading or telling stories or enjoying books is the most important in a life well lived. So B is wrong. Providing a model for the dramatic recounting of a story. C seems logical, in my opinion, because providing a model is sort of like providing inspiration. The narrator's father, sort of provided a model for him, provided inspiration for him on how to tell stories effectively. And, he really follows this model and he follows this inspiration when he tells Naomi stories in the same way that his father told him stories. So C seems logically correct. D, exposing the narrator to a number of classic novels written by renowned authors. The passage never talks about any classic novels, and it never talks about the renowned authors that sort of the narrator's father exposed him to. So D is wrong. 7 is C. Number 8, the passage indicates that the narrator's father viewed storytelling as something that... Okay, so where can we see in the passage how the narrator's father felt about storytelling? I feel like in this sort of paragraph, starting in around line 43, we can see that he must have told hundreds, perhaps even thousands of stories, not just at night, but throughout the course of any given day, over breakfast, during lunch, in the middle of a conversation, stuff like that. So in this way, I feel like, once again, without looking at the answer choices, that the narrator's father really, valued stories to the extent that he, introduced it to his family, he introduced it to his family life, and he felt that stories were really a integral part to what brought his family together and what connected the people in his life. So let's look for an answer choice that says that. Continued a long-standing family tradition. We never know if storytelling is long-standing or even if it's a family tradition. So A is wrong. Provided a means of bringing historical events to life. This is, I think, a good trick answer because the narrator's father does, bring stories to life. He does make them interesting to learn about, but he never talks about any historical events. He talks about, fictional stories maybe, but there's no indication of any historical events, so that's wrong. C, help children to distinguish good choices from bad ones. This is just inconsistent with the information given in the passage. C is wrong. Was part of the fabric of the family's everyday life. Okay, so this seems like a very cohesive answer because it matches with what we looked at in the text. The narrator's father brought these stories to the breakfast table, to the lunch table, to wherever they might be having a conversation. So in this way, D makes sense because in bringing the stories to so many different places, the narrator's father really believed that storytelling or stories was an integral part of the family's everyday life. 9, as used in line 53, wrong nearly means. Line 53, there was no wrong time with him, or if there was, he didn't live long enough for me to see it. So considering the context, this is where the author is talking about how the father would literally tell stories anywhere, anytime. So there was no wrong time with him. There was no time where telling a story was inappropriate. He could sort of tell a story anytime, any place, and it would be fine. So let's look for an answer choice. Immoral, inaccurate, wrong, unjust, wrong, inappropriate, once again, as we said. So number 9 is A. Number 10, which situation is most similar to the one described in lines 66 through 68, starting if I obvious? Line 66 through 68. If I heard the story before, I let him tell it to me again. His performance was that good. His love of story, that obvious. So here in line 66 through 68, the narrator is really saying, He doesn't care if he, sort of tells the story again, because he's not there for the story. He's there for sort of the experience and the enjoyment and sort of, the memories that the father brings when he tells the stories. A viewer eagerly anticipates the new episodes of a television series each week. This doesn't show repetition. It doesn't show the viewer, rewatching episodes. So A is wrong. An artist paints a favorite landscape at several different hours of the day. Again, it doesn't show repetition. It doesn't show, hearing the story for a second time. It just shows different hours. So B is wrong. A moviegoer happily sees a particularly memorable film for a second time. This makes sense because there is that sense of repetition, watching the movie a second time. But also, the movie is particularly memorable. And that's sort of why the author, or the narrator in the passage rather, continues to listen to the father's stories, because they're memorable in how they're told. So C seems very right. D, an actress repeatedly recites the lines of her script to improve her performance. There is sort of an aspect of repetition here because she recites the lines over and over again. But this doesn't really indicate that, the actress repeats the lines because, she sort of enjoys the way she says the lines, or she enjoys repeating the lines and practicing. So because that's missing, D is sort of wrong. So that's it for this passage. Moving on to the second passage. This passage is adapted from Adam Alter, Drunk Tank Pink, and other unexpected forces that shape how we think, feel, and behave. Perhaps the first experiment ever conducted in the field of social psychology suggests that humans are often faster and stronger when they test their speed and strength in the company of other people rather than alone. That study, conducted at Indiana University in the late 1890s, was the brainchild of Norman Triplett, a cycling enthusiast and a sports aficionado. In the dozens of experiments, he pushed cyclists to ride as fast as they could on stationary bikes. Across his observations, Triplett noticed that the cyclists tended to ride faster when other cyclists rode nearby. One cyclist rode a mile in 2 minutes 49 seconds when alone, but managed to ride the same mile in 2 minutes 37 seconds in the company of 4 pacing cyclists. Similarly, he rode 10 miles in 33 minutes 17 seconds while riding alone, but rode the same distance 2 minutes faster when riding with several pacers. Triplett acknowledged that his observations were far from rigorous, so he conducted an experiment to show that the effect persisted in a tightly controlled lab study. So here we have some preliminary studies that were done by Triplett, but Triplett acknowledges that maybe there were some problems with his methods, so he decides that he's going to conduct a similar study in a lab to prove that the effect persists. Triplett recruited 40 children, ages 8 to 13, to complete his study in 1897. He measured how quickly the students could wind a fishing reel so that a small flag attached to the line traveled a distance of 16 meters. The task was simple but novel, and none of the children had played with fishing rods before the experiment. So this is sort of a control variable. We want to recruit children that have never done this action before the study, so we know that, sort of their experience doesn't play a role with how well they do the task. They performed the task both alone and in presence of other children, and Triplett noticed that they wound the reels faster in the presence of others. So this sort of confirms his earlier findings. He concluded that an audience enables people to liberate latent energy, not normally available when they perform alone. Science doesn't always tell simple stories, and other researchers challenged Triplett's groundbreaking results well into the 20th century. While some researchers replicated Triplett's effect, now known as a social facilitation effect, others found the opposite effect, known as social inhibition. Joseph Pessin and Richard Husband asked participants in their study to learn a simple maze, either blindfolded alone or blindfolded in the presence of other people. The blindfolded participants traced their fingers along the maze and reversed each time they encountered one of 10 dead ends. Instead of performing better in front of an audience, Pessin and Husband's participants completed the maze more quickly when they were alone. So this is contradictory to Triplett's findings, because when they were given the task of solving the maze, they were better alone rather than in front of others. Inconsistencies like these persisted for years until social psychologist Bob Zajonc proposed a solution. It all depends on the nature of the task. Audiences accentuate our instinctive responses and make it more difficult to override those responses in favor of more carefully considered alternatives. The children in Triplets' experiment devoted little thought and attention to frantically winding the experimental fishing reel. In contrast, learning a maze is difficult and it requires concentration. So basically, here, this guy, Bob Zajonc, or however you pronounce his name, is saying that these two experiments provide contrasting results because the tasks are very different. Winding a fishing reel doesn't require thinking, but a maze requires thinking. So maybe for tasks that are, sort of more difficult, you do better by yourself. But with tasks that don't require thinking, you do better with other people. Peasant and husband's maze learners were probably distracted by the knowledge that they were being watched and feared making a mistake in front of an audience. So this is sort of reasoning for why they got the opposite result. Zajonc avoided experimenting with humans at first, choosing to observe the behavior of 72 cockroaches instead. With a small team of researchers, he devised two small athletic tasks that required the cockroaches to scuttle from a brightly lit area in a small box to a more appealing, darker compartment. Some of the cockroaches completed a simpler task, in which they ran along a straight runway from the glare of the box to the darkened goal compartment. The remaining cockroaches completed a more difficult task, traversing a more complex maze before they could escape the light. Some of the cockroaches completed these tasks alone, but the researchers also built a small audience box to force some of the athletic cockroaches to compete in front of an audience of roach spectators. So this is sort of mirroring kind of the human experiments. The audience of roach spectators is similar to the humans that would maybe be observing other humans do tasks. Just as the researchers predicted, the cockroaches were much quicker to cover the straight runway when watched by an audience, reaching the darkened goal compartment an average of 23 seconds more quickly when they were performing before a crowd. But the cockroach athletes responded very differently to an audience when they were faced with a complex maze, reaching the goal 76 seconds more quickly when they were alone. The same audience that pushed the cockroaches to perform the simpler task more quickly also delayed them when the task was more complex. So that sort of confirms the theory that when faced with a complex task, it's better to be working alone, but when faced with a simpler task, we perform better in the presence of an audience. So moving on to the questions. Number 11, the main purpose of the passage is to A, assert that the majority of people learn more effectively in a group than they do alone. I can automatically rule this answer choice out because it focuses on learning. And while some, I guess, of the passage is dedicated to learning, the main focus of the passage isn't about how people learn. It's more about how an audience affects abilities. B, present the contradictory results of two studies about learning that have each been considered groundbreaking. So the two contradictory results aren't the main focus, the main purpose the passage was written. The main purpose of the passage, or the main focus of the passage, was to, sort of look at how audience affects performance. So B is wrong. C, to show how various experiments helped establish and refine the understanding of an audience's effect on performance. This makes sense because it shows the main idea of an audience's effect on performance, but it also mentions how the various experiments help establish, this sort of theory. So C is correct. D, chronicle the historical development of competing theories of social interaction. We never really see how these sort of theories develop over time. And also social interaction is sort of this broad term, and it's sort of too general when we're talking about more specific stuff as we talk about in the passage. So 11 is C. 12. Which choice best represents the different meanings of simple as used in line 27 and 36? So in lines 27, the task was simple but novel, and none of the children had played with fishing rods before the experiment. So obviously the task, which is simple, the task is the task of, reeling in the fishing rod. And when we say that the task is simple, we mean that it's easy. It's not difficult. It doesn't require a lot of thought. So in that way, sort of means like an easy task. And we also have to look at line 36. Science doesn't always tell simple stories, and other researchers challenge triplets' groundbreaking results well into the 20th century. So this is sort of showing that science isn't always black and white. Just because you have a theory doesn't mean it's, right. There isn't a straightforward path. There's always these twists and turns. The stories aren't always, concise. They aren't always easy. They aren't always straightforward. But there's always going to be this sort of uncertainty, and there's always going to be this element of discovery in science. So we should be looking for a word that means, sort of, science is not always a word like straightforward or easy to understand, something along those lines. And if we go back to the answer choices, we see that choice A, easy in line 27 and straightforward in line 36, really matches. Number 13, based on the passage, the design of triplets fishing reel experiment most likely ruled out which potential objection to his findings. So when we sort of consider the design of the experiment, we think about what variables did triplet control in its experiment to rule out potential objection. So if we go back to the passage, we sort of see here that he measured how quickly, this is sort of describing the experiment, he measured how quickly the students could wind a fishing reel so that a small flag attached to the line traveled a distance of 16 meters. The task was simple but novel, and none of the children had played with fishing rods before the experiment. So this is sort of one of the things that sort of is related to the design of triplets experiment, because he purposely chose kids for his experiment that had no experience with reeling in a fishing line, because a potential objection to his finding could have been, well, the results may have just been because the kids already knew how to reel in a fishing rod, which is why they did it so fast. So by using kids that have never, reeled a fishing line in before, he rules out this potential objection to his findings. So for that reason, 13 the answer is B, because it talks about the prior experience with reeling in a fishing line. And because this prior experience is sort of removed across all subjects, then they're basically ruling out this potential objection. Which choice best provides evidence for the answer to the previous question? So as we highlighted, lines 27 through 30 around here really gives evidence to our previous answer. So the answer choice for number 14 is C. 15, as presented in the passage, triplet would most likely agree that human beings. And we see that we have a answer choice after that. That is a best evidence question, number 16. So a strategy that I like to do here is I like to look at all the quotes before I look at all the answers, because we know that our answer for 15 must be related to a quote for 16. So logically speaking, if we can find a good quote, then we can also work backwards to find the answer. So lines 9 through 10, in dozens ending bikes. In dozens of experiments, he pushed cyclists to ride as fast as they could on stationary bikes. That doesn't show one of triplets' beliefs about human beings. So we can rule out A for number 16. Choice B, lines 32 through 35, starting he concluded, ending alone. He concluded that an audience enables people to liberate latent energy not normally available when they perform alone. Okay, this kind of shows sort of an ability of human beings. It is relevant information, so we can't rule out B yet. Choice C, lines 36 through 39, science doesn't always tell simple stories, and other researchers challenge triplets' groundbreaking results well into the 20th century. Okay, this doesn't talk about a tendency of human beings, so C is wrong for number 16. D, lines 39 through 42, starting while, ending inhibition. While some researchers replicated triplets effect, now known as social facilitation effect, others found the opposite effect known as social inhibition. So again, this doesn't show a tendency of human beings as it pertains to the study. So here we can really see that choice B is a very sort of logical, because it provides relevant information as it pertains to the experiment. So we sort of identified choice B for number 16 as a viable candidate as an answer choice. So by working backwards, we should be able to find the answer choice for number 15. So knowing that we talked about lines 32 through 35, he concluded that an audience enables people to liberate latent energy not normally available when they perform alone. Meaning that with an audience, people are sort of able to use this untapped source of energy, or an untapped ability, or a secret ability, when they're in the condition that they're around other people. So let's look for an answer choice that says that. Are capable of ultimately mastering almost any task in which they are presented. Mastery is never really talked about, so A is wrong. Exhibit a general tendency to avoid attempting difficult tasks when they're alone. The passage never talks about the tendency of people to, take on difficult tasks or to avoid difficult tasks. It only talks about their performance and not their tendencies. So B is wrong. C, have a strong desire to cooperate with other members of a group. Cooperativity is not talked about in the passage, so C is wrong. D, possess abilities that they are not always able to exploit. And this is sort of one of the benefits that go along with looking at the evidence before the question, because we already found evidence for this, so we sort of can link it to this, because he concluded that people have this sort of latent energy that's not available when they are alone. We can sort of conclude the previous answer is D, because sort of this latent energy that people possess are sort of the abilities that are not always able to exploit, because this latent energy, once again in lines 32 and 35 through 35, is energy that is only available when other people are around the person. Okay, so for that reason, number 15 is D and number 16 is B. Number 17, based on the passage, which choice best describes what happened when the cockroaches in xovjcdj's experiment attempted to complete the complex maze in front of a cockroach audience? So let's look for an answer choice. So here we see the experiment talking about a more difficult task, and now we want to look at a reference to the time. Here we see the cockroach athletes responded very differently to an audience when they were faced with the complex maze, reaching the goal 76 seconds more quickly when they were alone. So we know that without an audience, they are able to complete the maze more quickly. So let's look back at our answer choices. The cockroaches became less hesitant in making choices. We don't know anything about their choice making, so A is wrong. The cockroaches completed the maze more slowly than they had without an audience, meaning without an audience they were faster. So this is true because we just read it in our passage. The cockroaches in the maze appeared to communicate directly with the audience. Again, not directly stated, so we can't choose C. The cockroaches sought out the simpler task instead of the complex maze. They were never given a choice between, you can choose a simpler one or the complex one. So D is wrong. B is the correct answer for 17. 18, the author uses the terms athletic cockroaches, roach spectators, and cockroach athletes in the last paragraph of the passage, most likely to A, call attention to the similarity of the two experiments described. What two experiments? This is sort of very, vague. And also, if we look at the article, the two experiments described are the ones without spectators and the ones with spectators. So it's not a similarity because one didn't have spectators and one had spectators. So for that reason, that answer choice is incorrect. Stress the skepticism with which the author views the design of the experiment. This doesn't show skepticism at all. It just mainly describes the subjects of the study, the cockroaches. So B is wrong. Create a casual tone that offsets the seriousness of the work being done. Does calling the cockroaches athletic and calling them spectators and calling them athletes, does that really create a casual tone? And moreover, does it really, offset the seriousness of the work being done? Can we really characterize this work and this study as, extremely serious? I don't think we can, justify that with the information given in the text, so we can't choose C. And that just leaves D, to reinforce the idea that the observed cockroach behavior is comparable to that of humans, right? So when we look back at the passage, we remember that the study was initially done because they sort of didn't want to do it on humans. Instead, they wanted to first test it on a sort of smaller species, a more easy to control species that would provide similar results to as if the study were tested on humans. So to provide similarity between cockroaches, spectators, and athletes, they sort of use these words to compare and to reinforce the idea, as stated in choice D, that cockroach behavior is comparable to human behavior. So 18 is D. 19. According to the graph, how long did it take participants on average to perform an easy task when they were alone? So let's see. Obviously, we have to look at alone, and easy task is the dark bars. So this dark bar and alone, it's between 15 and 20. So more than 15 seconds, but less than 20. Answer choice B. Number 20, information about which of the following is presented in the graph but not discussed in the passage. So all of these are presented in the graph, obviously. We just have to rule out which one isn't presented in the passage. The time needed to complete tasks. This is explicitly mentioned in the passage because it talks about time many times. For example, it talks about 2 minutes 49 seconds, 2 minutes 37 seconds. Cockroaches were able to reach the goal 76 seconds faster. So specific times really are talked about. So A is wrong. Difficult tasks. It does talk about difficult tasks because the passage talks about the complex mazes and other difficult tasks. So B is wrong. Tasks performed alone. The passage really talks about this too when it talks about reeling in the fishing rod, and also in the cockroaches that did the simpler task alone. An inattentive audience. The passage never really talked about the attentiveness of the audience. It really only talked about the existence of the audience. Did the audience exist or not? So because it didn't talk about the attentiveness of the audience, D never really was discussed in the passage. So it's the right answer for number 20. So that wraps up the second passage on the reading section. On to the third question on this SAT reading section. Passage 1 is adapted from Christine Delamore. Why do zebras have stripes? New study offers strong evidence. Passage 2 is adapted from Laura Popick. Why do zebras have stripes? It's not for camouflage. Passage 1. The question of why zebras have stripes has puzzled scientists, including Darwin, for over a century, leading to 5 main hypotheses: that the stripes repel insects, provide camouflage, confuse predators, reduce body temperature, or help the animals interact socially. For the first time, scientists played all of these theories against each other in a statistical model, and the result was pretty much black and white. So the reason why zebras have stripes, as found by this study, was very obvious. We found again and again that the only factor which is highly associated with striping is to ban biting flies. So, the hypothesis that is correct is the hypothesis that says zebras have stripes to repel insects. said study leader Tim Caro, a biologist at the University of California, Davis. For the study, Caro and colleagues collected data from a vast range of sources, including museum collections and historical maps. First, the team looked at variations in striping patterns across the 7 living species of the equid group, which include horses, asses, and zebras, and their 20 subspecies. Most have some sort of striping somewhere on their bodies. They also noted where the stripes occurred on the body, for instance, the face, belly, or rump. The team then mapped where current and extinct equid species live, where biting flies are found, the ranges of predators like lions and hyenas, the distribution of forests, and other environmental factors that could influence the evolution of stripes. The data was then entered into a statistical model to find out which variable best explains striping. The results showed that the range of striped species overlaps with where biting flies are most active, regardless of species and where the stripes occur on the body, according to the study. So, across a numerous amount of species, regardless of where the stripes occurred, the range of striped species, overlapped most with the where biting flies are most active, which indicates that stripes are really there for these species to reduce the amount of sort of insects that are biting them. Brenda Larison, a biologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, who studies stripes in plain zebras, said the new study's approach is broad brush. What does that mean? And that more specific research may be needed. So she's basically saying that this new study's approach is very broad and maybe could be applied to many different sort of fields, maybe. And, more specific research needs to be made to sort of hone in on a specific study or a specific sort of event to get more specific and more accurate data. That's why the story is likely to be much more complex, and this is unlikely to be the last word on the subject, said Larison. Okay, now passage 2. Researchers based at the University of California, Los Angeles have produced one of the most comprehensive zebra stripe studies yet by examining how 29 different environmental variables influence the stripe styles of plain zebras at 16 different sites from South to Central Africa. The scientists found that the definition of the stripes along a zebra's back most closely correlated with temperature and precipitation in a zebra's environment. Okay? And did not correlate with the prevalence of lions, so lions don't matter, and these sort of flies don't matter. These findings suggest that torso stripes may do more to help zebras regulate their body temperature than to avoid predators and these types of flies, which I can't pronounce. So this is taking sort of a different view than passage 1. Passage 1 said that the stripes are sort of there to ban these flies from biting the zebras or to prevent the flies from biting the zebras. But passage 2 is saying that the stripes are there to regulate their body temperature. This wall we kept hitting up against was, well, why do zebras have to have stripes for predation? Other animals have predators and they don't have stripes, said study co-author Brenda Larison. And other animals get bitten by flies and they don't have stripes either. Other animals also need to regulate body temperature or thermoregulate, Larson pointed out, but zebras may especially benefit from extra cooling system because they digest food much less efficiently than other grazers in Africa. As such, zebras need to spend longer periods of time out in the heat of the midday sun eating more food. So sort of because zebras can't digest the nutrients from food as readily as other grazers in Africa, they have to spend more time eating. Because they have to spend more time eating, they're spending more time in the sun. And because they're spending more time in the sun, then this could be an explanation for the stripes, because the stripes can help them cope with spending more time in the sun by sort of regulating their body temperature. This is basically what Larison is saying. The team found that the plain zebras with the most defined torso stripes generally lived in the northern equatorial region of their range, whereas those with less defined torso stripes were more common in the southern cooler regions of the range, a finding that supports the thermoregulation explanation. So in the northern, sort of sunnier, hotter region, the zebras have very defined torso stripes to help regulate body temperature. In the sort of cooler south, the zebras have less defined torso stripes because they don't need it as much. The temperature is more cool there. Still, the researchers have not experimentally tested the theory that black and white stripes may generate small-scale breezes over a zebra's body. And some researchers don't think stripes can actually create this effect. So again, there's still this uncertainty with the study because they haven't really tested this sort of fundamental aspect of the study. They don't even know if scientifically how stripes, regulate body temperature. So this study, the results of this study at least, isn't 100% confirmed for this reason. I don't think that you would want to have a lot of black hairs along the top of your back if you wanted to try to keep cool, said Tim Caro, a professor of wildlife biology at the University of California, Davis, who studies zebra stripes but was not involved in the new study. It's kind of the last color that you want. So Caro is basically saying that, if you wanted to thermoregulate, why would you evolve to have, black coloring? Because black does absorb heat. Caro said regions with warmer, wetter climates are particularly susceptible to several species of disease-carrying flies, other than the flies that the team considered in their study, and that the relationship the researchers found may actually be a function of fly avoidance, not thermoregulation. So Caro is basically saying here in the last part of the passage that the regions identified earlier, the regions in the north that are sunnier, that are warmer, actually have a increased or a abnormally high amount of these types of flies and insects that bite the zebras. So the stripes may be actually because of the flies and not because of the thermoregulation. So now, moving on to the questions. Number 21, which choice best supports the idea that Caro's team's study may be relevant to animals other than zebras? So we want to be talking about sort of more of the 20 or so species that they talked about earlier. So here in passage 1, if we think about them talking about species, we see them talking about species early here, horses, asses, zebras, other 20 subspecies. But we see here in line 30 that the results showed that the range of striped species overlaps with where biting flies are most active, regardless of species and where the stripes occur on the body, according to the study. So saying that, the results, sort of apply no matter the species shows that the team study may be relevant to animals, sort of regardless of species and regardless of where the stripes are. So D is the correct answer for number 21. Number 22, in describing the new study's approach as broad brush, line 38, Larson suggests that the study, Brenda Larson, a biologist at the University of California, Los Angeles, who studies stripes and plain zebras, said the new study's approach is broad brush and that more specific research may be needed. So here she's literally saying that, the context of the research is sort of broad and we need more specific research to, hone in and do more specific studies before we get a definitive result. So produce results that are relevant to an array of scientific disciplines. We never really talk about any different scientific disciplines. We're really focused on this study, so A is wrong. Reveal that further research will require a specialized focus. Yeah, this is exactly what it says, because the line talks about more specific research may be needed. So further research will require a specialized focus. So B is correct. Raise theoretical questions that proved unanswerable. Nowhere is there a mention of theoretical questions, and nowhere are there a mention of questions that are unanswerable. So C is not consistent. D, collected far more data than could be analyzed properly. Once again, in these lines, we never really see a statement that the scientists collected too much data than can be analyzed. So D is wrong. 23, according to Larson in passage 2, transitioning to passage 2, the reason stripes are particularly beneficial to zebras is probably because zebras. So if we recall, Larson said that zebras sort of have this worse digestive tract or digestive abilities, which is the reason why they have to graze more and they have to be more exposed to the sun. So let's see the evidence that points to this in the passage. Let's see if we can find it. Okay, so here in around line 65, zebras may especially benefit from an extra cooling system because they digest food much less efficiently than other grazers in Africa. As such, zebras need to spend longer periods of time out in the heat of the midday sun, eating more food. So the answer should say something along the lines of that. Endure greater exposure to the midday sun than other grazers do. This is correct because, again, referencing back to the text, the reason why stripes are important or useful, as according to Larison, is that they thermoregulate. They help the zebras thermoregulate as they're out eating. Cannot escape predators as easily as other grazers. Predators not mentioned. B is wrong. Live in hot, dry climates that lack an adequate food supply for most grazers. Okay, it does talk about sort of food in general, but if we remember from the passage, it never talks about a lack of an adequate food supply. This makes it seem like it's an environmental problem, when in reality it's just a problem that the zebras face. The zebras can't digest food as well. It's not because there's a lack of adequate food supply. So C is wrong. Defend themselves more poorly against predator attacks than other grazers do. Predator attacks is just not relevant. So D is wrong. Okay, moving on to the next question, number 24. In passage 2, the fourth paragraph, lines 63 through 69, mainly serves to. So this is looking at the same passage where they talk about how zebras can benefit from stripes because they digest food less efficiently. So let's look. Note a distinction between zebras and other animals with stripes. Other animals with stripes, again, just not mentioned, so A is wrong. Suggests that a weakness in zebra physiology might be mitigated with stripes. Okay, so can we identify a weakness that the fourth paragraph talks about? Well, yes, we can. The weakness is the fact that they digest food much slowly and much less efficiently. Can this be mitigated by stripes? Yes, because stripes help thermoregulate and helps keep them, cool and at a stable body temperature when they're out in the hot sun grazing. So B is the correct answer for 24, it seems. C, imply that Carroll's research is based on a false premise about zebra grazing behavior. Grazing behavior isn't really talked about here, and there isn't really a false premise that's identified, so C is wrong. Describe differences between zebras in warm climates and those in cool climates. The fourth paragraph is just lines 63 to 69. They only talk about the differences between, the zebras in warm climates and those in cool climates in the later passage. It's not talked about in the fourth paragraph, so D is wrong. 24 is B. Number 25. Passage 2 implies that Larison's team's study falls short on being definitive because Larison... Okay, so why does it fall short on being definitive? Why can't they just give a definitive answer to the question? Well, our answer is in around line 76. Still, the researchers have not experimentally tested the theory that black and white stripes may generate small-scale breezes over the zebra's body. So here, the passage really points to this sort of scientific technicality that the researchers haven't really proved. And until they prove that these stripes can generate breezes, they cannot say that stripes help thermoregulate. A, disregarded facts that did not support her conclusions. This is too extreme. We never find any indication in the passage that she blatantly disregarded facts when she came to her conclusion and she did her study. So A is wrong. Use research methods that have not proved effective. This is not true because there's no, again, direct indication that her method of study, her research methods are ineffective. C, did not build upon the achievements of prior research on this subject. Well, this is never really talked about. Prior research on the subject, the achievements of prior research is never talked about. They're really focused on their study and the current rather than, prior research and the past achievements. D, has yet to confirm a key assumption made in the study. Has yet to confirm. This kind of makes sense in context with what we read in sort of, line 76, that area, because the fact that stripes generate small-scale breezes has not been confirmed. And is this a key assumption? Yes, because if this assumption is wrong, then the whole claim is wrong. So D is the correct answer for number 25. And going along with that, we really pointed to sort of lines like 77, this area, to choose our answer for D. So D is also correct for number 26. Lines 77 through 81 are the lines that best provide evidence for the previous question. Moving on. Based on passage 2, Carol would most likely agree with which of the following statements about the coloration patterns containing black stripes. So I remember that at the end of the passage, Carol sort of gave his take on the subject. So let's see. Carol says that I don't think that you would want to have a lot of black hairs along the top of your back if you want to try to keep cool. Okay, sort of saying that the color black is not really the best color for stripes, and they might sort of stop animals from thermoregulating properly. He says later that it's kind of the last color that you would want, because black, of course, absorbs energy. It doesn't help animals maintain a low body temperature by reflecting or releasing energy. They have an unknown genetic basis. Genetic basis never talked about, so we can't choose that. They might hinder thermoregulation in animals. This is correct, because again, as we pointed out, Caro is saying black stripes are sort of unfavorable because black absorbs heat instead of releasing heat, so it might hinder the thermoregulation. They occur in nature very rarely. The rarity of the black stripes is never talked about, so C is wrong. Aesthetically unappealing, we don't know how Caro thinks about the stripes. We don't know if he likes the color black or if he likes striped designs or not, so we can't say that they're aesthetically unappealing. D is wrong, and 27 is B. Number 28, in passage 2, the phrase particularly susceptible, line 90, mainly serves to. So in line 90, we see here that Caro said regions with warmer, wetter climates are particularly susceptible to several species of disease-carrying flies. So these regions have an increased danger with the number of disease-carrying flies and other flies that are sort of prevalent in the area. So because there's sort of an abundance of these types of flies, animals and other things in this region are particularly susceptible. Point out a flaw in Larson's conception of zebras' geographic range. This is just completely unrelated. He's sort of talking about the insects and where they are centralized and where they have a large population. He doesn't, point out flaws. A is wrong. Emphasize the abundance of pests where some zebras live. This seems very logical because the reason why Caro says that these regions are particularly susceptible is because the number of flies, the number of insects in this area is large. C, highlight the challenges the terrain presents to zebras in avoiding predators. Predators never really talked about, and the challenges of the terrain, it doesn't talk about, mountains prevent zebras from running away, rivers prevent zebras from running away, so C is wrong. Imply that the heat of their environment affects zebras more negatively than it does other grazers. Heat isn't, once again, it isn't talked about here. The focus is insects. So D is wrong. Number 29. The primary purpose of both passages is to consider studies that describe the process by which stripes became widespread among zebra species. So A sort of talks about how the evolution of stripes, how stripes, maybe started out as a genetic mutation and sort of soon, sort of the whole species had stripes. It doesn't really talk about the process by which stripes became widespread. It more so talks about the function of stripes and why zebras have stripes in the first place. So A is wrong. Dispute a common misconception regarding zebra stripes. I never recall a common misconception being stated, so B, we can't choose B. C, explore the likely benefit that zebras derive from their stripes. This is correct. because both of the passages, both of the studies talked about in both of the passages talk about, why do zebras have stripes? What do stripes do for zebras? D, compare zebra stripes to coloration in other animal species. Other coloration in animal species simply just isn't talked about. The main focus is just stripes. So D is wrong. C is the answer to number 29. Number 30, based on the description of Caro's study in passage 1 and that of Larson's study in passage 2, with which claim regarding zebras would both researchers most likely agree? A, stripes in zebras are used primarily for a different purpose than to provide camouflage. Is this a true statement? Well, in passage 1, Larson says that these stripes on zebras are help them because they sort of repel insects and they stop insects from biting them, not because of predation. And passage 2, Caro sort of talks about how these stripes also help them avoid flies, and maybe how they help regulate body temperature, possibly, as they talked about earlier in the passage, not because of predators. So A is a good answer because camouflage is not the reason stated for zebra having stripes, as noted in passage 1 and passage 2. B, the role of stripes in zebras remains as elusive as today in the past. While there is no direct statement saying, oh, we have made no progress in finding out why zebras have stripes, this is it's sort of wrong in my mind immediately, because they've already done so much studies on it. So they should be feeling as if they are sort of making progress towards finding out the reason why zebras have stripes. So it would be not logical to say that the role of stripes remains as elusive as today is in the past. The evolution of stripes in zebras is in direct response to predation. Well, if A is wrong, then, if A is right, then C is definitely wrong, because both of the passages agree that it's not because of camouflage to avoid predation. So C is wrong. D, the geographic locations in which zebras live do not influence stripe patterns. Well, stripe patterns, this is just not very correct, because if we see in sort of passage 1, I recall it talking about having more distinct stripe patterns. Oh, sorry, that's in passage 2. In line 68, as such, zebras, not in line 68, but in line 70. The team found that the plain zebras with the most defined torso stripes generally lived in the northern, less defined torso stripes in the southern. So that points to, sort of stripe patterns, and that shows that geographic locations do affect stripe patterns. So D is wrong. Last question. Number 31. In the passages, Caro and Larson defend their conclusions by relying on A, several experiments that simulate conditions in nature. We never really see any simulated conditions. We really see more of, sort of observation, more of statistical models that show sort of these correlational studies. So A is wrong. Field observations, again, we never really see field observations. We never really see evidence of them going out into the field and observing zebras. So B is wrong. Data collected from various museums and maps. Museum data, not really shown. Map data, not really shown. So by process of elimination, we can choose D, and we also have to make sure it's correct though. Observed correlations among multiple variables. So this goes hand in hand with sort of the correlational, the statistical studies that we talked about earlier. Because, for example, sort of in passage 2, they do an experiment, they do this sort of statistical study on 2 variables, sort of the regional differences, north versus south, and also the stripes. So here we see multiple variables, and we see that they're really observing correlations among these 2 variables. So For that reason, number 31 is D, and that concludes this passage. Moving on to the fourth passage of this SAT reading section. This passage is from Charles Dickens' American Notes for General Circulation, originally published in 1842. After spending 6 months traveling in North America, British novelist Charles Dickens wrote an account of his travels and of the people he encountered. But I may be pardoned if on such a theme as the general character of the American people and the general character of their social system, as presented to a stranger's eyes, I desire to express my own opinions in a few words before I bring these volumes to a close. So he's saying he wants to talk about some of the things that he's observed about America and the American people as an outsider, as a foreigner. They are by nature frank, brave, cordial, hospitable, and affectionate. Cultivation and refinement seem but to enhance their warmth of heart and ardent enthusiasm. And it is the possession of these latter qualities in a most remarkable degree which renders an educated American one of the most endearing and generous of friends. So he's saying that Americans have all these such good qualities, and Americans, if they're educated, they make some very good companions. I never was so won upon as by this class, never yielded up my full confidence and esteem so readily and pleasurably, as to them never can make again, in half a year, so many friends for whom I seem to entertain the regard of half a life. So he's saying that just knowing some Americans for, half a year and, sort of interacting with them, he's felt like he's, known them so well. They've become such good friends that it's as if he's known them for half of his life. These qualities are natural, I implicitly believe, to be whole people, that they are, however, sadly sapped and blighted in their growth among the mass, and that there are influences at work which endanger them still more, and give but little present promise of their healthy restoration, is a truth that ought to be told. So here basically he's saying that, yes, Americans are this and this that are, some good traits about Americans, but at the same time, they also have sort of some problems. It is an essential part of every national character to pique itself mightily upon its faults. So pique, we see here at the end, it says to take pride in, and to deduce tokens of its virtue or its wisdom from their very exaggeration. One great blemish in the popular mind of America, and the prolific parent of an innumerable brood of evils, is universal distrust. So one of the main problems that this author Charles Dickens sees in America is this problem of sort of universal distrust. Yet the American citizen plumes indulges with self-satisfaction. Yet the American citizen plumes himself upon the spirit, even when he is sufficiently dispassionate to perceive the ruin it works, and will often adduce it, in spite of his own reason, as an instance of the great sagacity and acuteness of the people, and their superior shrewdness and independence. So basically he is saying that, Americans, they see this sort of act of distrust and this act of, distrust, universal distrust, as sort of an instance of, their great knowledge, the acuteness of their people, and their superior shrewdness and, their superior independence. You carry, says the stranger, this jealousy and distrust into every transaction of public life. So this sort of universal distrust really is a problem in many aspects of public life. By repelling worthy men from your legislative assemblies, it has bred up a class of candidates for the suffrage who, in their very act, disgrace your institutions and your people's choice. So he sort of takes a political standpoint here. By distrusting, by having this outlook of universal distrust, Americans are repelling worthy men from political positions, and they have bred up a class of candidates that are, not deserving of these roles of power because they're disgrace to America. It has rendered you so fickle and so given to change that your inconstancy has passed into a proverb. For you no sooner set up an idol firmly than you are sure to pull it down and dash it into fragments. So this sort of universal distrust has sort of led to American inconstancy. Americans no sooner set up an idol than they pull it down and sort of destroy it. And this because directly you reward a benefactor or a public servant, you distrust him merely because he is rewarded, and immediately apply yourselves to find out either that you have been too bountiful in your acknowledgments or he remiss in his deserts. Any man who attains a high place among you, from the president downwards, may date his downfall from that moment. So again, the idea of universal distrust. Universal distrust sort of destroys people that are responsible for America and people who have positions of power. For any printed lie that any notorious villain pens, although it militate directly against the character and conduct of a life, appeals at once to your distrust and is believed. You will strain at a gnat in the way of trustfulness and confidence, however fairly won and well deserved, but you will swallow a whole caravan of camels if they be laden with unworthy doubts and mean suspicions. So, at the first sign of sort of unworthy doubts and, mean suspicions, Dickens is saying Americans will go so far, they will go so far to, try to get rid of this doubt and to get rid of this suspicion and to fix their lives. Because he's saying, you will swallow a whole caravan of camels if it means that you'll dispel doubt and dispel suspicion. You'll go so far as to, harm yourself just to get rid of this one thing. Is this well, think you, or likely to elevate the character of the governors or the governed among you? The answer is invariably the same. There's freedom of opinion here, Every man thinks for himself, and we are not to be easily overreached. That's how our people come to be suspicious. Okay, so now let's move on to the questions. One central idea of the passage is that Americans' wariness of their elected representatives has led to poor judgment on the part of the citizens and to inferior candidates for public office. This really does make sense as an answer because in sort of this line 30, line 35 area, he really talks about how elected representatives are, sort of this topic of wariness, a topic of nervousness, a topic of anticipation among Americans. And in part, it has led to poor judgment and inferior candidates for public office because Dickens points out that, the candidates that are voted in are sort of disgraces to the American institution. And also they are no worthy men in the legislative assemblies because they have all been repelled away. So A seems correct. Distrust of both their fellow citizens and foreigners means that Americans will remain insular and unrefined. There isn't really a focus on foreigners and fellow citizens, more of a focus on politicians. Perceptiveness and independence have enabled Americans to be astute judges of their elective officials. This is sort of one of the problems that Dickens sees with Americans. This isn't a central idea that Americans have these sort of beneficial qualities. These are some of the problems, or Dickens wants to talk about the problems, not sort of their good characteristics that allow them to become judges. The suspiciousness of their politicians has undermined the government and contributed to widespread instability. There is a sort of suspiciousness about politicians, but we can't go as far to say as there has been an undermining of the government because the passage never really explicitly states that. We can't choose that answer. So moving on to the next question. Over the course of the passage, Dickens' main focus shifts from. So if I were to just look back at the passage, I can really find like two sort of main ideas that he talks about. At the beginning of the passage, sort of in the first two paragraphs, he talks about some of the desirable qualities of Americans, how Americans, make good friends, how Americans are compassionate, affectionate, and how he has really come to make good friends with a lot of Americans in his travels. But later on, he sort of picks at the faults of Americans in a way. Both faults in the character of Americans and also faults in sort of their political system. A, defending Americans against the charge of being uncultivated to conceding that Americans would benefit from being more refined. Defending Americans against the charge of being uncultivated. There never really is talk about Americans being uncultivated and sort of uncultured in the beginning. The beginning is more positive, and there is no defense against this by Dickens, so A is wrong. Describing particular kindnesses shown to him by Americans, to questioning why Americans are so suspicious of their own countrymen. Describing particular kindnesses. This would be something like, oh, I remember a time when an American, gave me money when, when I was buying stuff. Maybe a particular American invited me to his house for dinner when we had just met. Maybe a particular American paid for my meal when he was in line in front of me. This is like a particular kindness. It's sort of an example of a kindness that an American did to Dickens. And we really don't see any of that. There isn't a particular kindness in the beginning. Dickens really talks about how Americans are sort of kind, and he sort of throws out these general terms like frank, brave, cordial. He never gives any particular examples, particular kindnesses, so B is wrong. Discussing the tendency of nations to take pride in their flaws, to recommending that Americans view themselves more critically. Discussing the tendency of nations to take pride in their flaws. This never really is talked about. While Dickens may, sort of note and pick at the flaws in American society, he never discusses how Americans take pride in that flaw, and also he never really talks about how it's a tendency for nations to take pride in the flaw. Tendency means that there's a trend. He never really addresses a trend. He never says, oh, it is, very likely that nations tend to take pride in their flaws. So C is wrong. Praising admirable qualities identified with Americans. Okay, this is very true. To expressing concern about certain objectionable American traits. Okay, this seems like the most safe answer because we can identify and confirm both parts of the answer. A, praising admirable qualities. Does he talk about that? Yes. In the beginning, Dickens talks about how Americans are by nature frank, brave, cordial, hospitable, affectionate, and how he has made a lot of good American friends in such a short period of time. And B, does it talk about expressing concern about certain objectionable American traits? Yes, it talks about, this sort of American suspicion and this American sort of distrust that sort of plagues them and plagues their government. So D is correct. As used in line 2 and 3, character most nearly means. 2 and 3, but I may be pardoned if on such a theme as the general character of the American people and the general character of their social system. So character here in context really means like how a thing is portrayed, the general nature of the American people, sort of a broad statement that shows like a generality of American people. So as used in line 2 and 3, character most nearly means symbol. A symbol of the American people? No, not really. A rank? No. Nature of American people. As the general nature of American people. This sort of goes along with character. It has the same meaning. Let's see, the last answer choice, it's portrayal, a general portrayal of American people. So that just sounds wrong. So C will be the right choice for number 34. 35. Which choice provides the best evidence for the idea that Americans too readily accept unfounded criticism of their elected leaders? Okay, so I remember he really talks about sort of the president and anyone below him in around line 50. Any man who attains a high place among you from the president downwards may date his downfall from that moment. So this is sort of the elected leaders that he talks about. For any printed lie that any notorious villain pens, although it may militate directly against the character and conduct of a life, appeals at once to your distrust and is believed. So here the author is basically saying that once someone is coming into power and is elected as a president, as a whatever governor, as a senator, whatever, even if one person, one notorious villain, an unknown reporter, a random person writes one word, one sentence that's distrustful, that goes directly against this political figure, then it appeals to American distrust and it's believed. So this is sort of goes along with what we were talking about in number 35, because it shows that, Americans, they'll believe anything that anyone says about, their sort of elected leaders. So this occurs in around line, 50 through 60, around there. So we should be looking for an answer choice that says that. And lines 52 through 57, we see here in choice C. So that's the correct answer. Question number 36. As used in line 18, regard most nearly means. Okay, line 18 here. These qualities, it's before that. So many friends for whom I seem to entertain the regard of half a life. So the regard of half a life. So if you recall, when we were sort of analyzing the passage, I talked about how this is talking about how the author feels that Americans, sort of make the most endearing and generous of friends, as said here, because he states this as an example. In the half year, sort of, that he has known some people, he has felt that he has known them so well, he has come to know them so well, that he sort of feels as if they have known each other for such a long time, for whom I seem to entertain the regard of half a life. So this really shows sort of his appreciation, his friendship, the camaraderie that they have as friends, because once again, regard is used as, the sort of description for a friend of half a life. So if you think about a friend that you may have known for half your life, you are bound to, appreciate them, and really love them as a person. So let's look back at the answer choices. Regard most nearly means care. Okay, care may be a good answer. We'll see. Motive, that just doesn't seem right at all. Appreciation. Appreciation and care are sort of similar, so we'll keep both of them for now. And aspect and motive are just completely wrong out of context. Okay, so let's compare care and appreciation in context. So here, in half a year, so many friends for whom I seem to entertain the care of half a life. That just doesn't really make much sense, so let's try appreciation. In half a year, so many friends for whom I seem to entertain the appreciation of half a life. Just makes much more sense, because through this sort of long period of half a life, Dickens reveals that he has sort of come to an appreciation for their relationship and for their friendship. And that is sort of what he is trying to say overall in context. So C is the correct answer for number 36. 37. Dickens suggests that the tendency towards suspicion exhibited by many Americans is especially problematic because. So why is being suspicious problematic for individual Americans? It causes people to be distrustful of their neighbors and acquaintances. We don't talk about neighbors and acquaintances anywhere. Emboldens people to challenge each other's judgments. Does it really embolden people? Does it give people the confidence to challenge each other's judgment? No. The passage really talks about how, it allows Americans, or it encourages Americans to sort of tear down and destroy political figures. C, invites people to act with too great a degree of independence. I would actually argue that it's not very independent, because sort of at the first sign of distrust, people are believing and going along with others. So it's not really independence. D, encourages people to act against their best interests. Okay, so we should be able to make this work since this is the last answer choice that we're left with. So here, sort of when he talks about eating the caravan of camels and stuff like that, he talks about, let me see actually. There should be a line about here in line 60, but you will swallow a whole caravan of camels if they be laden with unworthy doubts and mean suspicions. So at the first sign of sort of unworthy doubts and mean suspicions, Americans will go as far as to, metaphorically obviously, swallow a whole caravan of camels. They will go so far as to harm themselves at any sign of suspicion and at any sign of distrust. So that really gives evidence, solid evidence for choice D. Number 38, as used in line 35, reason most nearly means. Line 35, and will often adduce it in spite of his own reason as an instance of the great sagacity and acuteness of the people and their superior shrewdness and independence. So in context, he's sort of talking about this topic of universal distrust. He is talking about in the reasoning of Americans, in sort of the judgment of Americans, in sort of the perspective of Americans, this idea of universal distrust is just sort of an instance of, their great mental capacity, their great acuteness, their great shrewdness, their great independence. So we should be looking for a word that aligns with that. So once again, reasoning, judgment, perception, sort of viewpoint. It is their view. So let's look for an answer. Judgment, it is their judgment. Okay, that just immediately jumps out. It is their explanation. That doesn't make as much sense as judgment. Explanation sort of, you're explaining your reasoning for something. It's not really a belief. C, cause, and D, defense. Those just don't really make much sense. So 38 will be A. Number 39, Dickens most likely adopts the point of view of the stranger in line 38 too. Okay, in line 38, Dickens says, "You carry," says the stranger, "this jealousy and distrust into every transaction of public life. By repelling worthy men from your legislative assemblies, it has bred up a class of candidates for the suffrage who in their very act disgrace your institutions and your people's choice." So sort of taking on this perspective as the stranger, I would say, sort of gives a context, gives a perspective to this argument that Dickens is making as if it was a real conversation. It sort of makes it more dramatic. It gives it life. It gives this conversation life. So let's look at the answer choices. Expose harsh criticisms of Americans that he believes to be unfounded. Does he really believe these criticisms to be unfounded? No. Dramatize a strong view of a certain American intellectual tendency in an imaginary conversation. Okay, this imaginary conversation aspect pops out at me because we're talking about how he makes this conversation seem sort of real, but in reality it's imaginary. And dramatize, it sort of makes sense because it sort of makes it more realistic in a sense, in the sense that it becomes sort of a real conversation, but it's also more dramatic because it makes it seem as if real people and real events are involved. So B seems correct so far. C, articulate a view of Americans that he previously held and has since abandoned. Okay, we never know if this view is previously held and since abandoned. So C, we can't say with confidence. D, report on a conversation that he had with a particular American citizen. Okay, we never know if this, event really happened or not. So we can't say, this conversation 100% happened with a real American citizen. So D is wrong. In the passage, Dickens implies that American political leaders are often, okay, where does he talk about political leaders? I recall sort of in the bottom half here, in around line 40, he talks about, by repelling worthy men from the legislative assemblies, it has bred up a class of candidates for the suffrage. He has bred up a class of candidates for people to vote on who, in their very act, disgrace your institutions and your people's choice. So sort of these candidates are not very good. They're just bad politicians, and they're sort of undeserving of this position of power. Okay, so unresponsive to their constituents, there's no indication of this. Undeserving of the positions they hold, yes, sort of they're disgraceful, they're disgraces to the institution, kind of saying that they're undeserving of sort of the political power that they possess. Too changeable in their judgments. We never really see, again, an indication of the politicians being changeable in their judgments. Like sort of, are they easy to persuade? Are they easy to change their mind on certain topics? No, we don't see that. Well positioned to wield their authority. This is just positive, and for that reason it's wrong. Dickens implies that American political leaders are bad. Saying that they're well positioned to wield their authority is sort of painting them in a positive light. So D is wrong. 40 is B. 41. Which choice provides the best evidence for the answer to the previous question? Let's look at the lines we talked about here. Around line sort of 35 through 37, around there. Okay, so this is the closest line we see here, so let's just check. Lines 39 through 43. You carry, says the stranger, this jealousy and distrust into every transaction of public life. By repelling worthy... Oh, okay, so never mind. I just misspoke earlier. So it actually wasn't lines 35 through 37 that we were talking about. We were actually talking about around lines 38 through 40, around there. Around lines maybe even 41 through 42. So this is actually directly the same lines as we talked about earlier. So A is going to be the correct answer for 41. Number 42. According to the passage, Americans quickly turn against the elected leaders they had recently idolized because Americans... Okay, this seems very similar to what we talked about earlier. You know, sort of the notorious villain that pens the distrust against the political leader. And here, sort of towards the end of the first sort of kind of half of the passage, he talks about how Americans are so quick to, set up an idol and pull it down and dash it to fragments. And he sort of states a reason for this. He says, because you reward a benefactor or a public servant, you distrust him merely because he is rewarded. And immediately apply yourselves to find out either you have been too bountiful in your acknowledgments or he too remiss in his deserts. So he's basically saying that people become suspicious. You distrust him. People become suspicious merely because he is rewarded. So he is basically saying that people sort of distrust, they sort of are suspicious of people because they are rewarded with such high position, with such power. So this sort of indicates that maybe these people aren't sure of whether or not these elected politicians deserve this sort of high honor and deserve this sort of award. A, are suspicious that anyone who is elected might not be worthy of the honor. Okay, that sounds like what we just talked about. Have learned from experience that elected representatives are likely to be corrupt. Likely to be corrupt sort of is a red flag, but also learn from experience, because we never really talk about sort of the experience of American voters, the experience of American citizens. And we can't really tell from this non-existent experience that representatives are likely to be corrupt. So B is wrong. C, know that elected officials abandon their political platforms soon after being elected. We never really see, again, indication that these officials will abandon their political platforms after being elected. So C is sort of irrelevant. D, distrust the political institutions that are the foundation of American government. This is sort of, again, sort of like C, off topic. Distrust the political institutions that are the foundation of American government. They don't, when people vote for an elected leader and they come into power, they don't question the foundation of the American government. They question the individual in specific. They don't question the general American government. So D is sort of factually wrong and sort of logically wrong. So the answer choice for number 42 is A. And that wraps up this passage. The last passage on this SAT reading section. This passage is adapted from Kelly's Cervic. Gut bugs may boost flu shots' effects. 2014 by American Association for the Advancement of Science. Every year, some unlucky people get the flu even though they've had their seasonal shot. One reason, according to a new study, might be their gut bacteria. Researchers have shown that, at least in mice, a strong immune response to the flu vaccine relies in part on signals from intestinal microbes. The findings could help explain variation in the response to the vaccine and suggest ways to maximize its effectiveness. The new evidence came out of a curious observation that researchers revealed in a 2011 paper. Bali Palendran, an immunologist at Emory University in Atlanta, and colleagues were looking for genetic signatures in the blood of people injected with the trivalent inactivated influenza vaccine, a mixture of 3 flu strains. They wanted to know whether the expression of the specific genes in the immune system's white blood cells correlated with the amount of vaccine-specific antibodies in the blood, which indicates how strongly a person's immune system responds to the shot and how much protection that person will gain against future infections. In a long list of genes associated with strong vaccine response, the researchers found an unexpected one, the gene that codes for a protein called toll-like receptor 5, TLR5. We thought this must just be a coincidence, Palendran says. TLR5 is a sensor flagellin, a protein that makes up the appendages of bacteria. Why would a receptor that interacts with bacteria in the gut have anything to do with the body's response to a virus injected into muscle? Maybe, the group thought, B cells, the white blood cells that produce antibodies, receive a signal from bacteria that boosts their activity. So in response to this sort of abnormal and unexpected result, the fact that, the gene that codes for TLR5 is associated with a strong vaccine response, the team sort of has to come up with some theory or sort of hypothesis to explain this finding. And they think that maybe B cells, which are white blood cells that produce the antibodies, sort of receive a signal from the bacteria that is created by TLR5. And thus, it is in this way that it boosts the response to the vaccine. To explore that possibility, the researchers designed a new study using mice. They gave the flu vaccine to 3 different groups: mice genetically engineered to lack the gene for TLR5, germ-free mice with no microorganisms in their bodies, and mice that had spent 4 weeks drinking water laced with antibiotics to obliterate most of their microbiome. 7 days after vaccination, all 3 groups showed significantly reduced concentrations of vaccine-specific antibodies in their blood compared with vaccinated control mice. The reduction was less marked by day 28, as blood antibody levels appeared to rebound. But when the researchers observed the mice lacking TLR5 on the 85th day after vaccination, the antibodies seemed to have dipped again, suggesting that without this bacterial signaling, the effects of the flu vaccine wane more quickly. The researchers saw similar results when they gave mice a polio vaccine, which, like the flu shot, uses an inactivated virus and doesn't contain so-called adjuvants, additives that boost the body's immune response. Palendran and colleagues suggest that these weaker, adjuvant-lacking vaccines rely more heavily on bacterial signaling. They didn't see the same results with the live virus in the yellow fever vaccine, for example. No specific type of bacteria seemed more important than another in prompting the vaccine response, but further experiments showed a major role for macrophages, immune cells that display pieces of the virus to activate B cells and that can also recognize flagellin. Palendran's favorite explanation is that flagellin manages to break through the lining of the intestines to circulate in the body and activate B cells and macrophages. amping up antibody production. But where and how the interaction happens is a huge mystery. He says, we don't have the full answer. Okay, now let's move on to the questions. Number 43. The primary purpose of the passage is to A. Discuss research on a factor that influences vaccine effectiveness. Well, this automatically makes sense because we can confirm the answer by pointing to evidence in the text. Does it discuss research? Yes, the passage does discuss research because it talks about sort of the research that Palundrin did on mice and on TLR5. Does it do research on a factor that influences vaccine effectiveness? Yes, it does, because the factor that sort of influences the vaccine effectiveness and sort of this topic of the research was the existence of this TLR5 gene and how that contributes to the activity of the vaccine-specific antibodies after vaccination. B, describe how vaccines are tested for safety and efficacy. The passage never talks about, what sort of tests and what sort of regulations and what sort of requirements vaccines have to pass before they're deemed to be safe. So B is wrong. Present a study of the role of bacteria in causing illness. It doesn't talk about how bacteria really contributes to making someone sick, so C is wrong. D, analyze the genetic components of the flu virus. The flu virus is sort of talked about, but the genetic components, sort of the molecular, DNA, the molecular sort of aspects, the smaller aspects aren't really talked about. It's more talked about in a general way, so D is wrong. 43 is A. Number 44. In the second paragraph, lines 20 through 26, the author uses the words curious and unexpected primarily to suggest that Palundrin and his colleagues. Okay, so here in around line 10, the new evidence came out of a curious observation that researchers revealed in a 2011 paper. So what is this curious observation? This curious observation, as we will read later on in the paragraph, is the fact that this gene, TLR5, a gene that codes for a protein called toll-like receptor, is actually has a strong correlation with the amount of vaccine-specific antibodies in the blood. So now let's look for the word unexpected. In a long list of genes associated with strong vaccine response, the researchers found an unexpected gene. This gene was not expected to have a strong correlation to vaccine response. So now let's look for answers. Did not anticipate that the gene coding for TLR5 would be so widespread in the people who received the trivalent vaccine. This isn't talking about sort of how the gene coding for TLR5 is widespread in the people who receive the vaccine, but it's more of talking about the correlation between the gene and the activity of the antibodies in the vaccine, not the people, the widespread of the gene, like how widespread the gene is in the people who receive the vaccine. So A is wrong. B, assume that the gene encoding for TLR5 would not be found in any of the people with weak immune responses to the trivalent vaccine. Curious and unexpected sort of show a surprising result. And here we don't really get that, because assuming that the gene encoding for TLR5 would not be found in any of the people with weak immune responses is sort of logical, because TLR5, if it does, induce antibody sort of activity, then it would be expected that an absence of TLR5 would be found with people who had weak immune systems. C, we're surprised to find a link between the expression of the gene in coding for TLR5 and relatively high counts of trivalent vaccine-specific antibodies. This is a very logical answer, because there immediately is sort of the element of surprise. They were surprised to find, this sort of link, this sort of correlation between the expression of the gene and relatively high counts of trivalent vaccine-specific antibodies. So this is correct. D, had previously overlooked the connection between the gene encoding for TLR5 and changes in white blood cells in response to the trivalent vaccine. Well, one thing that immediately strikes me as wrong here is the fact that it talks about previously overlooking the connection. They never had really considered this connection before, and in that way, it can't have been previously overlooked. So D is just wrong. So C is the correct answer for number 44. Number 45. Which statement regarding subjects who had strong immune responses to the trivalent vaccine can be most reasonably inferred from the passage? So once again, strong immune responses likely indicate that they had a abundance or a good amount of the gene coding for TLR5, or the expression of the gene was sort of evident in these patients. They demonstrated higher white blood cell counts in response to the trivalent vaccine than in response to other vaccines. Okay, there is no comparison between vaccines, so that is just kind of wrong. B, they had a similar pattern of gene expression that was not found in subjects with weak responses to the vaccine. So this seems like a correct answer because people who had strong immune responses likely had a strong expression of the TLR5 gene. And it's similar among people who had strong immune responses. But this this gene expression of TLR5 gene was not found in subjects with weak responses to the vaccine. So that is a logical choice. C, they showed immunity to flu strains other than those for which the trivalent vaccine was intended. The passage doesn't talk about, unintended immunity to other flu strains. It focuses on, sort of the flu or the disease with which the trivalent vaccine was intended. So C is sort of off topic there. They possess some types of intestinal bacteria that had previously been observed only in mice. This is just completely off topic. We never really talk about in the passage, sort of similarities between human and mice and how humans might have gotten intestinal bacteria from mice. So that's wrong. Which choice best provides the best evidence to the previous question? So we should be looking for lines that sort of talk about how people who had strong immune responses had a similar pattern of gene expression that was not found, that was absent in subjects with weak responses to the vaccine. So if I think, we really see here that in lines 23 through 25 around there, in a long list of genes associated with strong vaccine response, so we see this correlation, strong vaccine response, the researchers found an unexpected one, the gene that encodes for a protein called toll-like receptor 5, or TLR5. So this shows that the answer to number 45, they had a similar pattern of gene expression that was not found in subjects with weak responses to the vaccine, because they, as stated in line 24, they had a strong vaccine response. So that sort of provides evidence for number 45. So number 46, the answer will be C. Number 47, according to the passage, which statement best explains the hypothesis that Polendron's group tested in their experiment with mice? So if we look back at the passage, I can point to a specific line where Polendron states her hypothesis. And her hypothesis is this: maybe the group thought B cells, the white blood cells that produce antibodies, receive a signal from bacteria that boosts their activity. So this kind of shows the correlation between the gene encoding TLR5 and sort of the antibody response because of B cells. And B cells, because they receive signals, this is why the gene encoding TLR5 is correlated to the amount of vaccine-specific antibodies. So we should be looking for an answer that talks about that. B cells must receive signals from intestinal bacteria to begin producing vaccine-specific antibodies. This is not really the hypothesis. B, vaccines containing active viruses must be accompanied by adjuvants to generate a strong immune response. Viruses aren't talked about, adjuvants aren't talked about. This is just not consistent with the information. The effectiveness of vaccines at stimulating flagellin activity depends on the presence of a gene that encodes for TLR5. So finally, we see something that talks about TLR5, but is it correct information? The effectiveness of vaccines at stimulating flagellin activity. We aren't really talking about, stimulating flagellin activity. If we consider the context, this is in context of the strength of the immune response rather than the stimulation of flagellin activity. Flagellin activity isn't related or isn't as important to what we're looking for as is, the strength of the immune response and the activity of the antibodies. So for that reason, C isn't the best choice. D, the strength of the immune response following vaccination is related to the white blood cells' detection of signals from intestinal bacteria. So this just sort of encapsulates everything, all the sort of specifics that we talked about when we looked at the hypothesis in the passage. Because one, it talks about sort of the strength of the immune response being affected. It talks about the white blood cells, the B cells, and it talks about the detection of signals from the intestinal bacteria. So D covers all our bases, so D is the correct answer for number 47. Number 48, the main purpose of the last paragraph is to, so let's take a look at the last paragraph. So in the last paragraph, they kind of bring up macrophages, they bring up, sort of immune cells, they bring up some correlation maybe between sort of these B cells and macrophages. But in the end, and very importantly in the end, the passage states that where and how the interaction happens is a huge mystery. We don't have the full answer, indicating that maybe more research, more funding has to be put into this to get some definitive results. More scientific testing needs to be done. Question the overall importance of the vaccine response in light of new discoveries. It's not really being questioned. And really, there's no new discoveries being mentioned, so A is wrong. Suggests that the researchers who studied the vaccine response were uncertain about their data. There is no uncertainty about their data. It's more of a emphasis on the fact that they need more stuff to back up their data. They're not really uncertain because in the end, they've done their research and the research does back up their data. C, emphasize the fact that further research into the nature of the vaccine response is necessary. This sounds like what we talked about because going back to the passage again, they say it's a mystery and they don't have the full answers. So that sort of implies that, more research is needed to get more answers. D, urge other scientists to consider furthering the existing work regarding the vaccine response. So this is sort of similar to C, but it takes on a sort of persuasive approach. Urge other scientists to consider furthering the existing work regarding the vaccine response. And it's sort of not consistent with the tone. The tone of the concluding paragraph is more of like looking towards the future and sort of optimistic. There's a lot of mystery in the air, but at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity and there's a lot of chances for us to find the right answer. But it's not really persuasive, urging other scientists. So for that reason, D is wrong. Number 49, as used in line 63, prompting most nearly means. So here it says, no specific type of bacteria seemed more important than another in prompting the vaccine response. Prompting here sort of like means like starting. The bacteria starts the vaccine response. The bacteria elicits the vaccine response. So we should be looking for a word that takes that same meaning. Prompting most nearly means inciting. Yes, the bacteria incites the vaccine response. So that just makes sense in context. Suggesting, shortening, refreshing, yeah, it just doesn't make sense in context. You should be able to plug the word in and systematically eliminate each answer choice. Number 50, according to figure 1, the relative concentration of vaccine-specific antibodies in the germ-free mice 7 days after vaccination was closest to which value? So once again, figure 1 is right here, and we're looking for germ-free mice, which is the rightmost bar. I can't highlight it for some reason, but we can see that it's very close to this value of 0.2. So our answer for number 50 is A, 0.2. Number 51. Figure 2 supports which statement about the relative concentrations of vaccine-specific antibodies in control mice and in mice without TLR5? So they increased between 7 and 28 days after vaccination. Do they both increase? So 7 days is around here and 28 days is around here. So we can see that they both increased. So A is consistent with the information that's given, so it should be right. B, they reached their highest points 85 days after vaccination. That's certainly true for the wild type, the control mice. After 85 days, it's the highest. But for the without TLR5 mice, it's actually lower. It reaches a peak at around 30 days. So B is wrong. Let's see. C, they began to decrease 28 days after vaccination. So is it really 28 days? For the mice without TLR5, they did begin to decrease after 28 days. But for the wild type mice, the control mice, they continue to increase. So that is the wrong answer. D, they returned to their lowest levels 85 days after vaccination. For the wild type mice, 85 days is actually the high point, it's the maximum, not the lowest. So D is also wrong. So the answer to number 51 is A. Number 52, based on the passage and figures 1 and 2, how would the bars in figure 1 most likely change if they focused on the concentration of vaccine-specific antibodies 14 days after vaccination? So figure 1, we see that it shows right now at least 7 days after vaccination. So we have to combine sort of the information given in figure 2 and the passage to sort of make an assumption about a trend that may occur. So figure 2, let's consider this first. We can see that in the period from 7 to 14 days, there is a period of increase in both of the mice, both the control and the TLR5. And sort of in the passage, we can point to this point, sort of 7 days after vaccination. All three groups showed significantly reduced concentrations of vaccine-specific antibodies in their blood compared with vaccinated control mice, okay? But the reduction was less marked by day 28 as blood antibody levels appeared to rebound. So we can see that in between those days from day 7 to sort of day 28, the blood antibodies appear to rebound. And by rebound, it means increase. So if they're increasing, we should see sort of these bars go higher in the next 14 days. The bar for the mice without TLR5 would be lower. We just talked about how it would be higher, so this is wrong. The bar for the mice given antibiotics would be higher than the bar of the mice for the control mice. We can't really tell this, at least it's not readily available given the data, so that's sort of ambiguous answer. See, the bar for the control mice only would be higher. Well, the passage explicitly stated that sort of all of the mice, all of the experimental mice began to rebound in their antibody levels, so that's sort of wrong. The bars for all 4 groups of mice would be higher. This is the most consistent with the data and the most consistent with the passage because the passage talks about a rebound and the data also shows a rebound. So for that reason, the answer to number 52 is D. And with that, we conclude our analysis and our review of the questions on this reading section.
All right, moving on to the writing section of passage 1. So this passage is about the agricultural technique of vertical farming, which where it's like farming indoors and it saves a lot of space, but there's also some drawbacks which are addressed in this passage. So we'll get into question 1. To make this paragraph most logical, sentence 5 should be placed where it is now after sentence 1, after sentence 2, or after sentence 3. So sentence 5 says, one creative alternative is vertical farming, growing crops arranged vertically inside tall buildings rather than spread horizontally on land. So it says one creative alternative at the beginning of sentence 5, which means it should be following a sentence that talks about a different type of farming, for which vertical farming is an alternative. So um, if you look at sentence 2, it says the amounts of arable land, water, and fossil fuels necessary to feed so many people using conventional agricultural methods are simply too great. So it makes the most sense to put sentence 5 after sentence 2 because it presents vertical farming as an alternative to conventional agriculture. And it also sets up like what vertical farming is, which is discussed later in this paragraph. So the correct answer is C. All right. 2 is just the correct, it's just word choice pretty much. So while vertical farmings are much more efficient in its use of water, so it's, you can see here that it should be possessive. So 2, A is not correct and C is not correct, which leaves it up to B and D. So the noun that's doing the possessing, the subject, is vertical farming techniques. And since that's plural, D, there is the correct answer. So 3. This is another one where you just have to choose like the one that makes the most sense. So vertical farmers use less water than do traditional places like farms. So it's comparing vertical farmers to other types of farmers, not farms, because that wouldn't make sense to compare two unlike things. So the correct answer is C, traditional farmers. All right, so 4. The writer is considering adding the following sentence. Should the writer make this addition? No, they shouldn't, because it just distracts from the focus of the paragraph. So the answer is C. This just talks about the vertical farming irrigation techniques, and it's just way off topic to include stuff about wheat, corn, and rice. Okay, 5. This is definitely a word choice question that I went over. The correct answer is A, no change. Sufficient, it's a word that gets the message across and is a lot simpler than all the other choices. Okay, so 6. Vertical farms can be located where they are most needed. It's not, because this talks about a farming technique that's kind of like, it's like just starting up now and is probably going to be expanded in the future. It doesn't make sense to have it in past tense. So C, are makes the most sense. If you put D, are being, vertical farms can be located where they are being most needed. That doesn't make sense. Okay, 7. Establishing farms in cities not only provides residents with fresh produce, but also reduces the fossil fuel consumed during shipping. The correct answer here is A, no change. It just makes the most sense and it reads the best of all the choices. Okay, moving on to 8. Despite the advantages of vertical farming, it can be difficult to construct buildings that let in enough sunlight for crops to grow. And the energy needed to supplement or replace sunlight with artificial light can be prohibitively expensive. So, which choice most effectively sets up the next sentence in the paragraph? The next sentence talks about an experiment with like inexpensive LED lights and just talks about how these have been seen as like useful and they can, like these LEDs can make artificial light, like, a good source of light, I guess. It's not too expensive. So the best choice here is A, no change, because the next sentence just provides a counterexample to like this statement that artificial light can be pretty expensive. All right, so 9. Low-cost LED lights have been promising, showing that farming with artificial light can be feasible on a large and great scale. It's just B, large, because large, extensive, and great all mean pretty much the same thing, and it's just too redundant to say two of those. So you just go with the choice that lists one of those, and that's B. Okay. More experiments are necessary to demonstrate the viability of vertical farms, which Dixon Despommier, professor of public health and environmental health sciences. So, professor of public health and environmental health science. Yeah, that's like that's the describing term for Dixon Despommier, and you just want to put a comma to separate those. So the correct answer for 10 is B. Okay, so 11. The writer wants a conclusion that restates the main idea of the passage. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? So if you can see what's already in there, vertical farming advocates will likely encourage consumers to patronize local businesses, including vertical farms. So that's not the main point of the paragraph. It's not talking about like the fight to kind of get consumers to buy from these new vertical farms. It's more about like just how this process could be, like feasible in the future. So the best choice here is D. Vertical farming and similar efforts to meet the world's nutritional needs can only become more important. That just has the biggest connection to the rest of the content in the passage. So moving on to section 2. This talks about singer Nina Simone, who became pretty much she used her music to help, forward the message of the civil rights movement. Okay. So the first question, 12. Many African American musicians, writers, and other artists. The best choice here is D, just because and should not have a comma after it, but writers should still have a comma after it. And a semicolon is definitely not needed in this. It's just a series of different, I guess, creative occupations. Other artists look for ways to use their skills to increase the cause of civil rights. So increase is not really the best word here. Increase just means to make something greater in amount, but that's not, you don't make a cause bigger or greater. You want to help the cause, support it. And the best choice for that is C, advance. They use their skills to advance the cause of civil rights. That just means push it forward and kind of give it some support. So yeah, that's the correct answer. 14. One such artist, celebrated singer Nina Simone, became a strong public voice for the movement. Correct answer for 14 is C. It's one such artist, celebrated singer Nina Simone. It doesn't make sense to end that with a semicolon because that the appositive there, which describes what the artist is, celebrated singer Nina Simone, that started with a comma, so it should end with it too. Okay. Nina Simone became a strong public voice for the movement, having studied classical music at the Juilliard School in New York City. So the writer wants to introduce one of the passage's important ideas. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? If we look later, you can see there are several parts about how Nina Simone was, kind of hesitant to speak up. It says here that although Simone was an avid supporter, she said she did not see herself in a leadership role. And then after that, it says Simone's unease about playing a more vocal part in the movement. Um, yeah. So it's kind of talking about how she's hesitant, but then at the end, it talks about how she makes a difference with her singing. So the best choice here is B, even though she hesitated at first to take a prominent role. So yeah, 15 is B. All right, moving on to 16. Simone's friend, the dramatist Lorraine Hansberry, had recently brought national attention to racial inequality through her play A Raisin in the Sun. Hansberry was passionate about inspiring her fellow artists to be more outspoken in support of civil rights. However, she pointedly asked Simone what she was doing for the movement while its most visible leader sat in a jail cell. At this point, you can see that Simone right now is kind of not really doing much. She's not really putting herself out there to become a leader in the civil rights movement. And her actions kind of conflict with Lorraine Hansberry's message for, all artists to pretty much speak out in support of civil rights. So, however, is the best choice. If you put oh wait, no, that's not the best choice. Sorry. D is the best choice. You just delete the underlined portion. If you just try them all, that makes the most sense. Okay, 17. She pointedly asked Simone what she was doing for the movement while its most visible leader sat in a jail cell. So this sentence is not a question, which eliminates C and D, and B is just awkward wording. So A is the correct answer. No change. Okay, 18. Simone's unease about playing a more vocal part in the movement was largely based was it was based largely on her misgivings about mixing politics with popular music. So was is the correct answer because unease is like a singular noun. If it was plural, then were would be the correct answer, but D was is correct. She thought that a 3-minute song was too brief to adequately convey a nuanced political message. Moreover, it seemed to her that popular music, typically intended for light entertainment, did not provide the dignity the subject matter deserved. So this sentence here that the writer is considering deleting in question 19, this talks about, or this gives like a reason why she was kind of hesitant to use her music to, help the civil rights movement. And like the point of this sentence is that like Nina Simone thought her music was just too light, too like, I guess, entertainment focused to pretty much do something serious, such as spread a message about civil rights. And it does connect to the main point that like she shouldn't really be mixing politics with popular music. So B, it should be kept because it adds an additional detail that supports the main point of the paragraph. Okay. Only a few months after King's arrest, the backlash against civil rights activists intensified. News of violent acts carried out against civil rights demonstrators and even bystanders shocked the public. So right here it's asking for which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion. The events dismayed Simone, period. In 1964, she wrote and performed her first protest song. So let's just go through the choices to see which one just makes the most sense and is the most clear. The event so dismayed Simone that in 1964 she wrote and performed her first protest song. So A, that sounds pretty good, and that A is actually the correct answer. If you go through the other ones, A makes the most sense. Okay, 21. Simone decided that Hansberry had been right. The stage and the airwaves could be used to promote the struggle for civil rights and denounce discrimination and violence. B is the correct answer here because right before it, where 21 is, it says the stage and the airwaves could be used to promote the struggle for civil rights and denounce discrimination and violence. So since it says promote, you want to use a verb in the same tense as promote. So denounce is the correct answer. Okay, 22. The writer wants a conclusion that emphasizes how Simone sought to motivate members of her audience to take political action of their own. Which choice best accomplishes this goal? The correct answer is B. In a fitting turn, Simone encouraged listeners to recognize their abilities and dedicate them to the cause of civil rights, just as Hansberry had done for her. This relates to pretty much like the main discussion of information in the passage, how Simone was friends with Hansberry, and Hansberry had spoken up for civil rights and encouraged Simone to do the same. And while Simone did hesitate, she eventually opened up to the idea of using music to help the civil rights movement. So if you just go through the other choices, they are not as none of them fit as well as B does. All right, passage 3. So this one talks about industrial organizational psychologists and just how the effects that they have in the workplace. So 23. The correct answer is B, specialists within the field, because it talks about industrial organizational psychologists, which is plural. If it was singular, A would be correct, no change. But since it's plural, it should be specialists. So the other choice that talks about plural psychologists is D, but it's too wordy. So B gets the job done and is pretty concise. Okay, so 24. Though hiring an IO psychologist is an expense a company may be wary of taking on, that should be 3 separate words. So maybe combined into one word that doesn't fit here. Yeah, it's just improper word usage, I guess. So it's down to C and D. Maybe wary within uh, just an A, or wary with an EA. Or that, no, sorry, that's weary. So weary just means tired. Wary with just an A means cautious. So C is the correct answer for 24. All right, so 25. For example, he has worked with NASA to study team dynamics. That should be plural, not possessive, so there's no apostrophe, among astronauts and the variables inherent. Variables is also plural with no apostrophe, so the correct answer is B. Inherent in the isolated and dicey environment of outer space. So for 26, this is just word choice. So dicey, dodgy, and chancy, they both kind of get the point across that it's kind of dangerous, but D, hazardous, is the best choice because it maintains a formal tone. Okay, 27. Which choice provides the best introduction to the main idea of the paragraph? If you look at the paragraph, it says, later, some IO psychologists research ways to make employees feel valued and engaged. For example, they may design training courses to help employees learn new skills or advance to leadership positions. So this paragraph is mostly talking about how IO psychologists, like the work they do to make employees more productive. So this isn't this paragraph does not discuss these survey results. They talk about how IO psychologists can try to improve workplaces. So the correct answer is C for 27. Okay, so 28. A company's success depends largely on worker morale. A 2010 Gallup study found that productivity lost by unhappy, disengaged workers cost companies $28,000 per person annually. The correct choice for 28 is just D. You need a colon here to separate these two independent clauses. Yeah, so the other ones just don't make sense with the punctuation that they have. Okay, 29. To minimize such losses, some IO psychologists research ways to make employees feel valued and engaged. So it's which choice provides the best transition from the previous sentence. The previous sentence talks about how disengaged workers cost companies $28,000 per person annually. Therefore, A, no change is the best choice because it talks about how psychologists minimized those losses of $28,000. All right, next to question 30. To meet these needs, companies are increasingly turning to the intuitions provided by IO psychology. So the word with the connotation that just best matches what they're trying to get here, which is pretty much like, the knowledge and like experience provided by IO psychology, the best one is insights. So yeah, it's just B. 31. Which choice best illustrates the claim made earlier in the sentence with information from the table? So earlier in the sentence, it says the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that IO psychology is still a relatively small field. The total number of psychologists is expected to increase 12% from 2012 to 2022. So earlier in the sentence, it says that IO psychology is still a relatively small field. However, this detail about how this field is going to grow in these 10 years is not related to how small the field is. So the best choice here is C. There were only about 1,600 IO psychologists in 2012. This relates, this relates best to the answer, or to what it says earlier in the sentence, and just how small the field is. All right, so 32. However, IO psychology is one of the fastest growing fields in the country, expected to grow 56% C between 2012 and 2022. This is just reading the graph. If you match the percent increase from 2012 to 2022 column with the row of IO psychologists, it's 56%. Okay, so 33. Though companies must spend money to hire IO psychologists, doing so is a worthwhile investment. You don't need anything after that comma. So D is the correct answer. All right, so moving on to this last passage. This talks about the Endangered Species Act and how it should become like more inclusive to provide better protection to endangered plant and animal species. Okay. So 34. While the ESA helps to preserve species classified as endangered, conservationists have identified hundreds of at-risk species. So this one is just like plural versus possessive. And if you go through all these choices, A, no change is the correct answer. Yeah, you don't need any of those extra apostrophes. Okay, so 35. If the ESA is to fulfill its task of preserving biological diversity, it must reform its procedures to ensure that the list accurately reflects the number of at-risk species in existence. So this is just like a question in the first passage. If it's two words that pretty much mean the same thing, you should only have one of them so it's not redundant. So it's D, ensure, for 35. Okay, 36. Um, So, which choice best introduces the topic of this sentence? If you look later in the sentence, it says scientists and government officials must define it for themselves. So, um, it pretty much talks about how the ESA is pretty ambiguous. So, the best choice here is D, because the Act does not explain the meaning of a significant portion. This just introduces where the ambiguity in the ESA comes from. So 37. And they often reach different conclusions. It's so the best answer is B, reach. Like if you're just to arrive at a conclusion, it's just reach that conclusion. If you're to reach for the conclusion or reach toward, that's kind of just trying to get to a conclusion, but this talks about how they actually get to those conclusions. So the correct answer is B for 37. Okay, 38. While scientists may debate the methods used to calculate this probability of extinction, and the set number of years would need to be, yeah. So this just presents two, I guess this is just a series of things. So the best choice here is B, and yeah, if you try the other ones, and makes the most sense. Okay, the ESA's criteria would also benefit from tighter restrictions. So this is 39. Which choice best introduces the discussion in the rest of the paragraph? Um, the rest of the paragraph talks about how the ESA only has two categories, yet there's a lot more species that like could benefit from protection if there were more like categories instead of just these two. So the correct choice for 39 is D, being more inclusive. Okay, so 40. Almost done. Which choice most effectively combines the sentences at the underlined portion? The Act uses only two categories to classify at-risk species. So since it already says it only uses two categories, you don't need to say two categories again. So B, C, and D are sorry. So you don't need to say these two categories. So it just makes the most sense to do A. This is another one of those where you just try every answer. But yeah, the Act only uses two categories to classify at-risk species, endangered, likely to go extinct, and threatened. So yeah, A is the best choice. So 41. By contrast, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, a private environmental group. There should be a comma after that, so the correct choice is D. There shouldn't be a dash or a semicolon, and if you leave out any punctuation, so if you leave it as is, as A, it says a private environmental group acknowledges a broader range of species. So if there's no punctuation, it doesn't tell you that IUCN is the private environmental group. It seems like it's just some like non-specific one. So the best choice is D for 41. Okay. 42. A comparison of animals classified by the ESA and IUCN. The correct choice for 42 is C. So it's the comparison, which is a singular noun. So it shouldn't be reveal, which is if the subject is plural. Since comparison is singular, the correct choice here is C for 42, reveals. It reveals that the IUCN lists a total of 642 at-risk species. So, which information from the table provides the strongest evidence in support of the passage's main argument? The main argument is that the ESA should be more inclusive and list more species that are listed by the IUCN. So the best choice for 43 is B. ESA fails to recognize 82.7% of the species listed as at risk by the IUCN. This just supports the main point that the ESA is not very inclusive and doesn't do a good job. Okay. So 44, it says a new classification system could also be financially advantageous. The US government would be able to begin protection efforts earlier, which might prevent the need for drastic and costly interventions when a species is nearly extinct. So the choice that best introduces the argument, it says it prevents the need for drastic and costly interventions. So the best choice here is just A, no change, because this new classification system could be advantageous financially.
Okay, number one, they gave you two lines. They want you to find the solution xy to the system formed by the equations. That's basically they want to find where the points intersect, and that's right here. So you just read out you just find out what that point is, and that's negative 1 comma 2. Number two, you have a checkers enthusiast who has 24 checkers. He takes him 35 to paint each check, design each one, and see if the checkers are already painted. So you don't want an equation for it. So you would first you multiply whatever how many ever checkers you have by 35, but you don't know how many checkers you have because you have 24 total, but you already used some, so you subtract 24 by C, and if you see that's the same as answer C. That's how you got the equation. Number three, sum. You just add the variables. It's very simple. Just make sure you add them. You add the ones that have the symbol like x5. So like there's nothing else that's x to the fifth power. That's why you would be 3 to the fifth power. You don't add 3 times 3 plus 12. That's a simple mistake. That's why they put on choice A to try to trick you. So yeah, so you just add them. That one's pretty simple, and you'd get on choice B. Number four, you have a line and they want line M is parallel. And if the line is parallel, that means it has the same slope, but they don't touch. So it passes through in 3. So that means if I was drawing the angle, I would say it passes through something like this. However, oh sorry, my bad. Yeah, so it was something like that, but I'm a bad. It's not really the straightest line, but yeah, you get the idea. So you want the equation. So first I would find the slope, and the slope is it goes down 2. So I think that's called values or whatever. So yeah, so it goes down 2 in 3 x value. So that's a negative 2 over 3 and plus 3. So that's answer choice A. Number 5, you have this equation. Just move the x and the constant to the other side and divide by 4. So for example, it would be 4y is equal to negative 5x minus 3 over 4, and you divide both sides by 4. And then so the y would equal that equation. So and then the slope would be negative 5 over 4x. So that's negative. It's this one. So it can't be C or D. And the y-intercept would be negative 3 over 4. That's why the answer is A. Number 6, with value of x satisfies the equation above. Again, you just add the x to one side and you add the constants to the other side, and you solve that way. And if you did the algebra right, you would get answer choice 6 for B. And then at that point, what I would want you to do is plug 4 back in to check your answer. Number 7, what are the solutions to the equation above? You have these two equations. So here it's actually pretty simple. You need to find for what makes this binomial and this binomial each equal 0. So here, if a negative 2 would make this equal 0. So that's why negative 2 is one of the solutions. That's why B can be because it doesn't show negative 2. And here, 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. So 2x equal to 1. X is equal to 1 half. So 1 half negative 2 are the two solutions. That's answer A. 8, here if you don't know how to add like complex numbers, you add the constants first. Like you do whatever the function is, you do that to the constants first, and then you do it to the the complex number. I don't like the imaginary numbers, whatever. So yeah, so you do 2 minus 2, that's 1. 4i minus 3i, that's simple, 1i. So that's minus I, like plus I don't know, 4i minus 3i is equal to I, my bad, like 1i, so yeah, so 1 plus I, B. 9 was solutions to the equation above. Here, what I would do is I would just plug in numbers. I'll plug in -5, plug in negative, like if NZ doesn't work, plug in -2. However, you plug in -5, you would see that it works. So answer choice A is correct. I feel like for some stuff like this, instead of just like you could solve this out, not that hard, but I just prefer to just plug it in. But if you want to solve, you multiply both sides, but you multiply this by 2 and multiply this by 3, like that. You multiply both sides by 6, and yeah, that's how you do it to get rid of the fraction, and you just solve for x. But I just prefer to just plug it in to make sure. Okay, now number 10. In the function above, k, constant 2 is a 0, the function was the value of k. So what this means, you know 2 is a 0, so that means p of x equals 0, but x is equal to 2. 2 squared minus 11 times 2 plus k. So now if you just did this, it'd be 0 is equal to 4 minus 22 plus k. That gives you, and so that would be negative 18 plus k. So that means 18 is equal to k is equal to 18 because it has equals 0. So if this is negative 18, k would have to be 18 to balance it out. That's why D is the correct answer there. Sorry, okay. Now number 11. What is the following expression is equivalent to the expression above for x greater than 0? Here, what I do is I would multiply top and bottom of this by 2, so I get a common denominator. That would give me 4 over 6x squared minus 1 over 6x squared. That gives me 3 over 6x squared. And I divide top and bottom by 2. That gives me 1 over 2x squared. And that is answer is D. Number 12, solution set for the equation above. Again, here I would do strategic plugging in. So I'd first plug in 1 because I know if it's not 1, I can cross off all the other ones. But 1 does work, so I can cross off B. And I know 3 can't work because if I plug in 3 for x, it would make the denominator equal to 0, and you cannot have a denominator of a fraction equal to 0. That's it's not a number. So 3 doesn't work. So I'd plug in 2. If I plug in 2, it does not work. So I know 2 is not the right answer. That means the only solution is solely 1. That's answer A. Now number 13, you have this equation, which is an exponential growth equation for petri dish. The function p, number of organisms after growing for t days in the petri dish, is in a function which of the following statements is true. So what this t over 2 tells you is that whatever the time, like for it to do multiply by 3, you'd have to have t equal to 2. So t equals a days, right? So that means you'd have to have 2 days in order to multiply the 60 by 3, which and if you multiply anything by 3, it's tripling it. So that fits with answer A. The predicted number of organisms in the dish triples every 2 days, because since it's over 2, that means every 2 days. Okay, now number 14. Next, I plane the graph of the equation equals y equals 9x plus minus 8, and this equation y equals x squared. So here, what I would do is I would just do the simple system of equations equal 9x minus 8. Bring that would be x squared minus 9x plus 8 equals 0. That's x minus 8 times x minus 1. I'm just factoring it here. I can get the x and what the solutions are. So x is equal to 8 comma 1. And I had to add them because it wants the sum of the x coordinates. So 8 plus 1 is 9. D. Okay, the last multiple choice in this section, which is function equivalent is equivalent to this. So this is like the radical problems that we did, where if you're multiplying it, if you the exponent's a fraction, what you do is you cube root it because the denominator is 3, and then you take negative 4x cubed, and you square that because the numerator is 2. So what I would do is it would be cube root of 16x6 to the 6th power, and then and that would be cube root of 8x to the 6th power times 2. Sorry, I don't know I put x there. I meant to say times 2. And 8x to the 6th power is equal to, it can be cube root, so that's 2x squared times the cube root of 2. So that gives me answer choice C. Okay, number 16. Now we have BC is equal to 8. The the cosine of x is equal to root 3 over 2. So what that means is that, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So what that tells me is that AC over BC, and BC is 8, I'm going to plug in 8 for that, is equal to root 3 over 2. And if you knew your unit circle, you'd already be able to tell that x equal to 30 degrees. But if you don't know what unit circle is, you can just solve for AC that way. And if you solve for it, since you had to divide 8 by 4 to get 2, that means AC had to be 4 root 3. So if this is 4 root 3, and now if you knew what your special right triangles were, you'd recognize that this is a 30, 60, 90 triangle, in that this is 60, 30, and then the proportions would be root 3 to 1, and that fits because this is 4 times root 3, 4 times 2, so 4 times 1, BA is equal to 4. So that means like AB is AB, BA, same thing. So that's equal to 4. Or if you don't know how to do that, if you don't know these special right triangles, you could use Pythagorean theorem and done it that way. Because remember, c squared minus a squared equal b squared. Okay, now number 17. What value of x has the equation above? So what I know here is I have to make x has to equal negative x minus 1. Or actually, let me put it this way. X minus x minus 1. Sorry. No. Okay, I'll keep messing this up. Sorry. X plus x minus 1 has to equal 0. So how do I know that? It's because since the denominators are both the same, I know that I know that for it to equal 0, x has to equal the negative of this number. I know that for a fact. Wait, sorry, I don't know why it's paused right there. Okay, I'm taking that back. Okay, so I know that this has to be, they have to be equal to each other in order for it to equal 0. X has to equal the negative of x minus 1. So that's x is equal to negative x plus 1. 2x is equal to 1. X is equal to 1/2. Yeah, and that's the best way to explain it. For function f of negative 1 is equal to 12. And f of 1 equals 16. If the graph is a line in x-ray, what is the slope? Slope is just y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So that's how you equation how you find the slope. So that would be 16 minus 12 over 1 minus negative 1. That's just 4 over 2, and that equals 2. Angle measure of 540 degrees within radians x pi was value of x. So if you don't know how to convert degrees to radians, you take whatever degrees you have, which is 540 in this case, and you multiply by pi over 180. And now if I can simplify this, because 540 is divided by 3 is equal to 180, so that's equal to 3, this is equal to 1. I can simplify it that way. That's why I know. So this is equal to 3 pi over 1. And so that's equal to 3 pi. And you want to know what x is because it's x pi, so that means x equal to 3. Okay, number 20, Tamika is ordering desktop. Sorry, it's not scrolling. Okay, Tamika's ordering desktop computers for a company. They cost $375 each. 6% of the total cost is the tax. And she can't spend more than $40,000. So what is the maximum number of computers that Tamika can purchase? So here, what I personally did was I just multiplied 1.06 times 375, and that gave me 397.50. That's how many dollars it costs per computer with tax. And I recognize that times 100 is close to 40,000. So I tried adding another 397.50, and it goes over 40,000. So I know that this is the maximum. So the max you could buy is 100 computers. Okay, number 1. Okay, which of the following is equivalent to the equation above? This is just using FOIL method to just multiply this binomial out. Yeah, just using FOIL. So if you used FOIL, it would be 6x squared plus, and then it would be 4x times 9x, that's 13x, plus 2 times 3 is 6. So yeah, so this would be 6x squared plus 13x plus 6. If you use FOIL, that gives you answer choice C. Number 2, function f is defined. What's the value of f of negative 2? You just plug in negative 2 to this equation. Very simple. You get negative 4 minus 11, which gives you negative 15, which gives you A. Okay, 3, which is based on the following, which fraction of flights for airline A? So we're not basing it off the total. No, we're basing it off the total for airline A. We're delayed. So delayed is 861 out of 2,890, and that is answer choice C. All right, number 4, political science wants to predict how the residents of New Jersey will react to a new bill proposed in the state senate. Which of the following study designs is most likely to provide reliable results to a political scientist? Mailing a questionnaire to each 200 randomly selected residents, surveying a group of 300 randomly selected New Jersey residents. Right off the bat, we know A is not as good as B because we have more people, first of all, and each are randomly selected. And and by surveying a group instead of mailing a questionnaire, it gives you a higher rate of response rate. But just the fact that there's more people, it already makes it better. Interviewing a group of students, we want all New Jersey, not just students. Serving a group of select U.S. residents, no, we only want New Jersey. So that's why B is the right answer there. Number 5, ratio of 0 to 5 to x equals into 1.5 to 2.25. Value of x, here just make this into a fraction to make it simplify for you, equal to 0.5 for x. And you see that you divide by 3, so 2.25 divided by 3, plug that into a calculator, and that gives you 5 is equal to A. Okay, moving on. Number 6, based on the equation above, what is the value of 2ax minus 1? Sorry, 1 second. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm back. Based on the equation above, what is the value of 2ax minus 1? So here you just divide both sides by 4, and that gives you 2x minus 1 is equal to 6b. Sorry about that pause for a second. I had to go get something. Okay. A website administrator is considering using one of the two models, exponential and linear. How much more purchases will be made by the exponential model than by the linear model 5 weeks after advertising the campaign begins? So just plug in 5 for x for both values into your calculator and subtract this number by this number, and you'll get the difference because you want to know how much more. And if you plug it in your calculator right, you'd get a 6,000. And always, if you have time, come back and check these to make sure you plugged in your calculator right. Because sometimes we all just misclick our calculator, and that can lead to errors. Okay, you have a 200,000 acre field at the end of 1928. Be starting in 1929. You began reducing the capacity by approximately 1,700 per year. So that's a linear relationship. So for 8, when that's for the graph, it should be answer choice A because it is downwards linear. 9, approximate storage capacity in acre of the reservoir at the end of 1993. So what you do is you see how many years it's been from 1929 to 1993, and then you multiply that by 1,700, and you subtract that number from 300,000. And if you just use a calculator again, and if you use the calculator properly, you should get answer choice B, 189,500. 10, if the reservoir's capacity T years after 1928 was between 209,000 and 292,000 acre feet, which of the following must be true? Well, basically what I would do is I would see which, like, how much subtraction you need. You need to subtract 8,000 to 10,000 from and 1,700 per week. So just plug in your calculator, 8,000 divided by 4, and you'd see that the number would, if you after 6 years, it would be more than 10,000. So it can't be D because it can't be past 6 years. And you see under 4 years, it would be way below 209,000. So it can't be B or A. That's why C is the right answer there. Okay, number 11. The scatter plot shows relationship, blah, 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 blah. Like I said before, I'm just going to skim through these questions because I'm assuming I've already gone through all these questions myself, and I've read through all of them. And hopefully you've done this test myself, so you've also read them. I'm just gonna skim through the question, but you should not. But when you're taking the test for the first time, like I didn't do that too, but you should not do actually read the whole question. Because sometimes they have like trick questions like that. But I already read it, so I already know what's going on. So I'm just gonna skim through it. So yeah, for number 11, blah blah blah. It's asking you how many grams of total fat of the sandwich for which is the prediction more accurate. That's basically where's the dot the closest, and for how many total fat. So that means what's the value, y value for that point. So it's this point right here, and the y value 60. The answer is D. Okay, number 12, which is the following solution to the equation, blah, blah, blah. So here what you would do is you would do 14 minus x equal to x plus 2, square both sides. So it's minus 2. I read not plus 2. Minus 2. So that gives you 14 minus x is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 4. And then you bring up both sides, all of these to the other side, you would get 0 is equal to x squared minus 3x minus 10. And that would give you x minus 5, x plus 2. So that gives you then 5 and 2 as answers. So you may think, okay, it's what 5 and negative 2. So you may think, oh, hey, it's 1 and 3. However, you always want to plug these back into this original equation to see if it just because sometimes you get the answer, but if you plug it back to the original equation, it'll become something called an extraneous solution. Extraneous. I may have spelled that wrong, but yeah. So it's called an extraneous solution, which means it's not an actual solution. So if you plug both these back in, you would see that negative 2 does not work. So that's why it can't be 1. That means it's 23 only, so that's why it's only C. Okay, 13, you have this equation, blah, blah, blah. Based on the graph, which is the same following statement is true, the company charges more per pound for orders greater than 100 than for orders less. If you see, it's deeper for like less than things, so it's actually the opposite that's true for A, and B is actually the opposite, so that's why it's true, because it's less per pound for orders greater than 100, because that's why the slope is less, because they're charging less. However, for less than 100 pounds, which is right here, the slope is much greater. So B is correct. And the other two are just tricking you by doing the y value instead. That's just trick questions. Okay, 14. If 2x plus 3 is equal to x minus 4, what is the value of x plus 8? Here I just solved for x. Very simple. Just put the x values on one side, what the constants on the other side. You get x is equal to negative 7, x plus 8. That's 1. Okay, so I can use C. So how that next x equals negative 7? I subtracted x from both sides, and I subtracted 3 from both sides. Yeah, I just want to make sure you guys know how I got that. But simple algebra. Number 14, group of 10 students play the game. They score a score equal to integer from 1 to 10. The mean score is 4. More than half the players received a score greater than 5. So how is the mean? So it's asking what about the mean of the remaining players. Well, the remaining players, it must be less than 4. That seems correct. So I'll leave it for now. Must be equal to 4. No, because if you have the mean of what half is 4, but the other half is all greater than 5, then that means you would be in between 4 and 5, not 4 exactly. And the mean it must be between 4 and 5. Again, it has to be less than 4 for it to even work. Must be greater than 5 does not work. So it makes sense too. If some numbers are half the numbers are above 5, but the other half is below 4, then the mean would be like around 4. So that makes sense why A is the right answer there. Okay, 16. You have a frame. The expression represents the area. What is the quantity this represent? So basically, you have 2x squared. That's the area of the total frame and the picture combined, because x times 2x. So from that, you can assume that what you're subtracting by is the picture itself. So if we're gonna, just for fun, if we draw a person here, so the picture itself is what you're subtracting from. So what are you subtracting? You're subtracting the area in square inches in the rectangle. Okay, number 17. The function f is defined above. The function g is defined by g of x plus 5, value of 0 3. So what I'll do is I'll plug 3 in here. So 3 times 3 plus 5, which is 3 times 8. That gives me 24. And then, but I had to add 5 because it's f of x plus 5. Give me 29. D is the right answer. 16. 6 ninth graders, 220. So that's the fraction is equal to 1.135 spend less than 3 hours. So 1.35 over, you want to know the total population, so x. So you just do some cross multiplication. So eventually you'd have 600 times 1.35 over 220 is equal to x. And if you plug it into your calculator, right, you'd get 3.68. And you can already cross off a and b because it's less than. And you want it, and 1.35 is the portion of the total. So that means the total has to be higher than 1.35. Okay, number 19. You have 2 points. The solution to the system. What are the values of x1 and x2? Just solve for the solution. So first I would put the 11 on the other side. So y is equal to x squared minus 11, and y is equal to negative 2. Just plug in negative 2. Negative 2 is equal to x squared minus 11. And just add side. You don't have to move the 11 to that side. I made a mistake there. Whatever, you made it fine. Just move the 11 back to the side. So plus 11. I don't know why I put one. Okay, sorry, my bad. Plus 11. Plus 11. That gives you x squared is equal to 9. X is equal to plus or minus 3. So negative 3 and 3. So D is the right answer. Okay, 20. So you have this energy levels, and 10% of net energy from one traffic level is transferred to the next traffic level. If a primary producer has 5,000 joules of energy, so you have 5,000 here. How much energy and calories transferred to the secondary consumers? So you want calories. So first I would solve with joules and then divide by 4.18 to get calories. So it wants secondary consumers, right? So I would go down the level. This would be 500, and this would be 50. This is something for biology that you would have to know that it's 10% each level. But we're doing maths here, not biology. But it's just something you'd learn in biology if you haven't taken it yet. So now we have 50 divided by 4.18. And if you did that properly, you would get the answer. And you calculate, but this is the calculator, so you can use a calculator. You get answer A. Okay, number 21. Which is the following equivalent to this, where A and B are positive integers? Remember, this was the problems that we did with radicals. So it's x is equal to B over A, which is C. Yay. Number 22. The graph above models the speed of an automobile in the first 5 minutes of travel. What total distance traveled from T1 to T5? So from T1 to T5 in the span of 3 minutes, he went at a consistent rate of 0.5 miles per minute. So in 3 minutes, 0.5, that's 1.5. That's why B is the right answer here. Okay, 23. In the figure above, sine 90 minus x is equal to 12 over 3. What's the value of sine x? So remember, sine 90 minus x is the same as cosine x. So the cosine of x is 12 over 13. So this would be, that means it's a cosine adjacent over adjacent over hypotenuse. So this is 12, 13. And if you knew your Pythagorean triples, you would know this is 5, or you could use Pythagorean theorem to figure out it's 5. And what sine of x is going to be 5 opposite over hypotenuse, 5 over 13, B. Equation above can you use to approximate the speed immediately of an object, which is the best interpretation of the number 9.9, 9.8 in this context? So it's not the speed when it hits the ground. No, not really. The increase in speed of the model each second after it's dropped. That seems consistent. So that seems like it's gonna be the right answer. The speed t seconds after it's dropped, no, because that's what S is. The initial speed, it's not the initial speed because it's not a constant. It's like it's a coefficient, so it can't be D. So B is the right answer there. 25, a magazine article on video game habits in the United States reported 2012 gamers spend an average of 5.6 hours a week playing games. That's for 2013 to be 6.3 hours. The average increase, so you want what's the 2% change? Obviously it's an increase, so it can be A. And if going back to the percentage problems that we did earlier, how you would do this, just do 6.3 divided by 5.6, and you would get 1.125. And so the increase is 12.5%. That's why D is the right answer here. Some equations above, A is a constant. What is the value, y value of the solution to the system in terms of A? So here you want to know what the y value is. What I would do is I would first multiply each equation by a number so I can cross out the x's. Multiply this by 3, multiply this by 5. That would give me 15x plus 3y equal 3a. And that would be negative 15x minus 10y is equal to 25. Now I would add these two, cross that off. That gives me negative 7y is equal to 3a plus 25 divided by negative 7, divided by negative 7. That gives me y is equal to negative 3a minus 25 over 7. And that's the same as answer choice A. If you're wondering why it's not 3a plus 25 over negative 7, this is just the same thing. I just moved the negative to the upper side because this is not an answer choice, so I just moved the negative to the numerator. Yeah, so that's 26, and now we're moving on to 27. The graphic equation above in the xy plane is a parabola which the following equivalence form to the equation includes the x and y coordinates and the vertex is constant. So we want vertex form, and if we look, A is really the only one in vertex form, so we can already tell that's the right answer. But just in case, if we wanted to solve for the vertex, it'd be negative b over 2a. And if you did that, you'd get the like that's the x coordinate of the vertex. And if you did that properly, you'd get the x coordinates 3. And so vertex form again is x minus h. H is the and vertex h comma k squared plus k. So h is 3. So the only one with x minus 3 is this a. So that's why a is already. So that's how you know a is the right answer. Okay, 28. You have Tia and Amir. They both did a survey with different amounts of people. Tia did for 150. Amir did for 85. And you have bar graph and you have box and whiskers plot. So if T is the median commute time of the employees who responded to TS survey and A is blah, 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 what is the value of T minus 8? So first, how you read a box and whiskers plot, this middle line right here, inside the box, that's the total median, that's the median for the total data. This is the median for the smaller data, and this is the for like the for the data that's above that. So like from this data, and this is the median from this data. But since we want the overall median, that's this number right here. So that's 35 minus Amir's data. So what we know it's 85 employees. So how you would solve this is you do 85 minus 1. This is an odd number. You do 85 minus 1 to get 84. Divide that by 2 to get 42. Now you start from the left and you count and you add these numbers until you get to 42. So 10 plus 10, that's 20, plus 11, that's 32, 31, plus 27, that's above 42. But so that means you know that 30 is the median. 35 minus 30, that's equal to 5. Now you have 29. Sorry. And we're trying to make the box and whisker plot for Amir. So if you didn't already know that the median for him was 30, if you looked at 29, you'd already know that's 30 because all of them have the median of 30 for him. Yeah, but either way, so the first way we can classify is using range. So if you didn't know for box whisker plot, these two lines represent the leftmost data and the rightmost data. So the least and the greatest. So for him, the least and greatest is 15 and 45. So we need one that's from 15 to 45. So it can't be A. That's one we already know. And now what I would do is I would solve for the median of one quadrant to see which one's the right answer. So if you did, how I would do that is now that I have 42, I would divide this number by 2 to get 21 and 22 because those are like the median numbers I would have to average out. So I would solve until I get 21. I'll start again from the left until I get 21 or 22. 10, 20. Here I get 21 and 22. So 25 is the median for that side. So that's B. So it's just solving the median using graphs. That's what 29 and 28, 29 is. Okay, 30. Lines K and L are perpendicular. What is the x-coordinate of point P? So you know this is 0, 0. And what you also know is since these lines are perpendicular, the slope is the negative reciprocal of this slope. That's the definition of perpendicular lines. So first I would do is I'll solve the slope for these two. So that would be slope again would be 3 minus 0 over 4 minus 3. That would, sorry, 4 minus 0. That would give me 3/4. So the reciprocal would be negative 4 over 3. And I know that this point is x comma 0. So I want to solve for x, right? So what I would do is I would know it goes down 3. So I would see at what would the x how many x would it take to go down 3? So I think so I know a negative 4 over 3 times an x value has to equal 3. So I would think what would the x value be? And if you did this and you just divide 3. So to do that you do x is equal to, oh, it's not negative. It's not going to be negative. Yeah, so it's negative 4 over 3 is equal to negative 3 because you go down by 3. So at that point, you just need to do 4 over 3 is equal to 3 over 3x. So x is equal to 3 times 3 over 4. And if you plug that into your calculator, you get 2.75. So you get 2.25. But this is how many x values it takes to go down by 3. So you have to add it to the existing x value, which is 4. So 4 plus 4, 2.25, that gives you 6.25. So again, I'm going to go into an overview of what I did. I found a slope of these 2 points, and then since k is a perpendicular line, I know the slope is a negative reciprocal of that. So I found a slope of that line should be negative 4 over 3, and I know that this is going to be x comma 0. So I knew that it goes down by 3. So I knew that negative 4 over 3x is equal to negative 3, and I solved for x is equal to 2.25, and I added that to 4.24 to get 6.25 to get the x value of that point. Okay, moving on to the grid number 31. In number 31, museum middle school model, 1 centimeter is equal to 16 of the actual. The actual skeleton is 184. So you just do 184 divided by 16, and you got the answer to be 11.5. Because if I plug it in, divided by 16, I get 23 over 2, which is the same as 11.5. So you can do 11.5 or 23 over 2. Either one works. How many cups, each with a capacity of 8 fluid ounces, can be filled from water with a cooler that has 10 gallons? So first I turn gallons into fluid ounces. That's 1,280. 1,280 fluid ounces divided by 8. And if I plug into my calculator right, I get 160. Okay, number 33. Triangle ABC. Angle A measures 48. All right. And then we have ABC is similar to triangle LMN. What that means is that the angle similar means the angle measures are the same, and the side lengths are proportional, which you can see in here, which they give you. What is the measure in degrees of angle L? So we know that L corresponds to A because based on the order. So whatever angle A is, that's the same as angle L. Angle A is 48, so angle L must also be 48. Again, similar triangles mean that the angles are the same angle measure. Okay, 34. You have these 2 lines. What is the value of A over B? Here again, just using system of equations, I would just solve for it. If you had a graphic calculator, you just plug it in, but if you don't, you can just solve by hand. So I would first make it y is equal to 19 over 6 minus 2/3 x, and y is equal to 3 over 5x. And now I would just solve like normal system equations. So that would give me 3 over 5x plus 2 over 3x is equal to 19 over 6. And then if I added those two together, 2 over 5, that I can just add to my calculator the 2 fractions that I want to like make them just like simple for my denominator. That gives me 19 over 15. X is equal to 19 over 6. So now x is equal to 19 over 6 times 15 over 19. So that's 50, which is equal to 15 over 6. So I'm gonna move this. I'm gonna put it this way. I'm gonna continue moving on this way. Now that I know x is equal to 15 over 6, what I can do is I can just plug that into one of the values. So y is equal to 3 over 5 times 15 over 6. That would be 1, 2, 3, 1, equal to 3 over 2. And now I have to divide the 2. So a over b. So it's 15. Sorry. So dividing fractions just multiplying into reciprocal. Hope you know that. 15 over 6. Sorry, 6 multiplied by 2 over 3. That's 5, 1. That's 1, 3. That's equal to 5 over 3. And that's the right answer. Again, if you have a graphing calculator, I think it's much, you can just plug it into a graphing calculator and you'll get the answer. But you can also do it by hand if you don't have a graphing calculator. Or value of z satisfies the equation above. This is just simple. I would multiply both sides by 8 to just make it simpler for you, so you don't have to deal with fractions. 8z is equal to 20z minus 21, and then you subtract it, so that's negative 12z is equal to negative 21. So z is equal to 21 over 12, and if you simplify that, that is equal to 7 over 4, I believe. Yes, 7 over 4. 36, a circle diameter with the endpoints, these 2 points, point 0, comma b lies on the circle. What is the value of b? So I know, because I know this is the diameter, what I'm going to do is I'm trying to solve for the, so first I'm going to find what the center point is. Now, to find the center point, you just find the midpoint, because the diameter goes to the center point, so I find the midpoint between these 2 points, and midpoint is just so I would do 7 minus 1, that's 8, divided by 2, that's 4, comma 3 minus 3, that's 6, divided by 2 is 0. So wait, sorry, I did this wrong. Sorry, my bad. Well, what you find the midpoint is you add the 2 x values divided by 2, so 7 plus negative 1 divided by 2, comma 3 plus negative 3 divided by 2. Sorry, divided by 2. So if you did this properly, you get that the midpoint is equal to 3, comma 0. And then to find the radius because you need a radius for the equation, you would just find the distance between these 2 points, and then just once you have the distance between the 2 points, you can just divide by 2. So that would be square root of negative 1 plus 7 minus negative 1 squared, which is 8. So 8 squared 64 plus 3 minus negative 3 squared, which is 9. So no, that's 6. That's 6 squared, which is 36. So 64 plus 36, square root of that that's a square root of 100. That's equal to 10. So that means the diameter is equal to 10. And you divide that by 2 to get radius. So r is equal to 5. And now I just plug it into the equation of a circle. So x minus 3, because it's mid center. Let me rewrite this. X minus 3 squared plus y squared is equal to 5 squared, which is 25. And now I just plug in. Now I want to know 0 comma b, so I plug in 0 for x. So that means negative 3 squared plus y is equal to b plus b squared is equal to 25. That's 9. So 29 minus 25 minus 9 is equal to 16. 16 equal b squared. B is equal to plus or minus 4. But since it has to be greater than 0, I know it's plus equal to 4. Okay, now number 37. So we have this race summary. And then we want to know during the 4th bit of the race, which is this column, right, the last column, to the round rate of 28 strokes per minute. Notice how many strokes did it take thing. So we take how many seconds, 108, divided by 60 to get minutes. And then once I have that number, I would have I would have to multiply by 28 to get strokes per minute. So doing that, so 108 divided by 60, that's 1.8 times 28. That's 50.4, but you want to round to nearest whole number, so it's 50. 50. By the end of the season, the coach wanted the team to reduce its mean split time by 10% as compared to the race. So I want to add up all these split times. So 109 plus 112 plus 111 plus 108 divided by 4 equals 110. Now once I have that, I want to divide it. I want to take it. I want to do 0.9% of it because I want to. He wants to reduce the mean time by 10%. So the mean time currently is 110 seconds, but since he wants to reduce it by 10%, I would do multiply by 0.9, and that gives me 99 seconds.